Hey guys, tonight we journey into the shadowed halls of the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, a place where history and whispers intertwine, where the beauty of the mountains cloaks secrets long held in its rafters. The night air outside is thin and brittle, carrying with it the scent of pine and the soft rustle of branches bowing in the wind. But inside, behind those grand white walls, a different atmosphere gathers. Something old lingers there, waiting to be noticed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Stanley rises like a sentinel at the edge of Estes Park, its wide veranda lined with wooden chairs, its windows glinting faintly beneath a pale moon. From the outside, it is stately immaculate, as though time has favored it with careful preservation. But to walk beneath its eaves is to feel the shift, the subtle turning of the world, just enough to place you out of step. Inside, the grand lobby greets with polished wood and high-ceiling chandeliers, casting pools of amber light that seem always a little too dim. The air smells faintly of old tobacco and polish, though no pipes nor cigars are seen. A piano rests in the corner, its lid closed, keys untouched. Yet some guests have sworn they've heard faint notes drifting at odd hours. The night Daniel arrived, a storm brewed over the Rockies, thunder rolling across the peaks like a warning. He was not the sort to believe in legends nor in restless spirits, but he carried with him a weight that only silence and distance could soothe. The Stanley promised both, or so he thought. The receptionist, a thin woman with careful eyes, welcomed him with a smile that felt stretched just a little too tightly. Her voice was even, but her gaze seemed to linger as though searching for something beneath the surface of his face. He signed the ledger, took his key, a brass tag with the number 217 etched deep, and made his way across the thick carpet toward the grand staircase. The climb was quiet, each step muffled by the woven runner, each wall sconce flickering as though uncertain in its task. The second floor stretched wide, lined with doors that looked almost identical, their numbers gleaming faintly. The hall smelled faintly of lavender, though beneath it was something harder to name, something metallic, a trace that caught at the back of the throat. Room 217 waited at the far end. Its door groaned softly as the key turned, as though resisting the act. Inside, the air was still heavy with the scent of aged linens and wood warmed by countless seasons. A single lamp glowed from the bedside table, its light pooling across crisp sheets tucked with military precision. Daniel set his bag down and sat at the edge of the bed. The storm outside cracked open lightning, splintering against the mountains, thunder rattling the window pane. For a long while, he listened, letting the sound settle into his chest, steadying him. But as the thunder rolled on, another sound threaded through it, a faint tap, then another. He turned his head. The bathroom door was ajar, darkness pooling beyond. The taps came again like the steady drip of water against porcelain, though when he rose and pressed the light switch, the sink was dry, the tub empty, the air cool with the scent of tile and dust. Back in the bedroom, the lamp flickered. A shiver ran through him, though the air remained still. He lay down, pulling the covers over him, watching shadows stretch along the ceiling as the storm's light bled through the curtains. His breath slowed his body, unwinding, and yet, just before sleep claimed him, the faintest impression passed over him that he was not the only one lying in that bed. A dip against the mattress, the weight of something unseen, a whisper too soft to shape into words. His eyes opened, but the room remained empty, only the thunder and the rain answering back. Still, the impression lingered. He was not alone. The storm lingered deep into the night, thunder flattening against the mountains, lightning igniting the lace curtains in brief bursts of white fire. Daniel lay on the bed with his eyes fixed on the ceiling, counting each flicker, each tremor, trying to anchor himself to something steady. But steadiness eluded him. The mattress shifted beneath his weight as if it shared him with something unseen. The hollow dip pressed closer, then withdrew, as though someone or something was testing how much space he would give. Sleep refused him. He sat up, running a hand over his face, then looked toward the door to the hall. It was shut, but not latched. A narrow line of dim light pressed through the crack, flickering faintly like a candle struggling against the dark. He remembered closing it firmly when he entered. His stomach tightened. He swung his legs off the bed, the wooden floor cold under his bare feet. The air thickened heavy with the strange metallic scent he had noticed before, sharper now, like old coins clutched too long in the hand. He rose and stepped softly across the room, each board beneath him creaking in protest. Before he reached the door, the faint light beyond flickered and vanished, leaving only darkness pressing at the edges. He froze, hand hovering over the knob. A sound followed, gentle at first, then steady. Footsteps. They passed his door slowly, deliberately, each creak of the hall's runner vibrating through the wood. He held his breath, waiting. The steps halted directly outside his room. Silence thickened, a pause drawn so long it became unbearable. Daniel reached, turning the lock with trembling fingers. As the mechanism clicked, something scraped along the outside of the door. Not a knock, no, something sharper. A nail or the edge of a ring dragging lightly from top to bottom. Daniel stepped back, pulse roaring in his ears. The scraping ceased. For several minutes, nothing followed. Then faintly laughter drifted through the wood. A woman's laugh, delicate and restrained, the kind of laugh meant to hide something darker beneath. He whispered to himself, "It's just old wood, old pipes, nothing more." But he didn't believe it. When at last silence returned, he crawled back into bed. He pulled the covers higher, staring at the bathroom door. The faint dripping sound had begun again, deliberate and timed, as though answering his every thought. He shut his eyes tight. Sleep finally stole him, but uneasily filled with broken dreams of long corridors and faceless women gliding just out of reach. Morning brought a startling calm. Sunlight spilled across the room, warm and golden, chasing away the storm. Birds sang faintly beyond the glass, and for a moment, Daniel could almost convince himself that the night had been little more than nerves. He dressed, buttoning his shirt with stiff fingers, and left the room. The hall stretched long and bright, polished wood gleaming as though scrubbed to perfection. A maid was dusting near the far end, humming to herself. When Daniel passed her, she gave him a glance that lingered a moment too long, her humming faltering. "Sleep well?" she asked, voice smooth but carrying an edge that made him falter. He forced a smile, as well as one can in a storm. Her lips curved, though not in amusement. "Yes, the storms here. They bring things to the surface." Her eyes flicked toward room 217. Then she bent back to her work. Downstairs, the dining room buzzed with quiet conversation. Guests stirred sugar into coffee, the clinking of spoons and the rustle of newspapers filling the space. It should have been ordinary comforting. Yet Daniel noticed the way people glanced toward one another with faint unease, as though each were careful not to mention what they'd seen or heard. At his table, the coffee was rich but bitter. He barely tasted it. His eyes were drawn to the far corner, where a man sat alone with his back, straight untouched toast on his plate. He looked at Daniel suddenly, their eyes locking. The man's gaze was glassy, unblinking, too intent. Then just as quickly he turned away. Daniel exhaled, pushing his cup aside. His hands trembled slightly, and not from caffeine. This hotel was alive in a way he had not expected. alive and watching. The mountains might keep their storms outside, but the Stanley had storms of its own. The morning light felt like a fragile thing, a thin veil stretched across something older, something that belonged to the night. Daniel walked through the lobby after breakfast, studying the long shadows clinging to corners that should have been harmless. The chandeliers glowed in soft daylight, their crystals catching fragments of sun, yet the air remained oddly cold, as though the building itself refused to acknowledge warmth. He lingered near the grand staircase, his hand brushing the polished rail. The wood was cool, smoother than expected, almost oily. He imagined how many hands had gripped it over the decades, how many people had ascended these stairs in excitement and descended in dread. Behind him, the reception desk hummed with the faint shuffle of papers, the careful turning of ledger pages. The same woman from the night before stood there, her smile taut, her gaze keenly fixed on him. "Did you rest well, Mr. Shaw?" Her voice floated across the lobby light, but deliberate, as if she already knew the answer. Daniel hesitated. "The storm kept me up a bit," he said, though the truth pressed harder on his tongue. He could not admit what he'd felt. "Not yet." She tilted her head, nodding slowly. "Storms do strange things here. The wind off the mountains. It carries more than air. Sometimes it carries echoes." Her words hung between them, carefully placed like an invitation he wasn't ready to accept. He offered a polite nod and turned away, unwilling to linger. Yet her voice followed softer. "Now room 217 has a history. You might find company there." Daniel's shoulders tensed. He didn't turn back. The day stretched long and quiet. He wandered the grounds, trying to shake the lingering chill of the night. The hotel stood proud against the backdrop of the Rockies, its white facade brilliant in the sun, its red roof gleaming like a crown. Tourists snapped photographs at the gates, laughing, pointing unaware of or unwilling to believe the layers hidden beneath its elegance. By mid-afternoon, he found himself in the music room. A grand piano stood near the tall windows, polished to a high sheen. Dust motes drifted lazily in the shafts of light. The lid was closed, the bench neatly tucked beneath. Yet when he stood there, he could swear he heard the faintest vibration, like a single key trembling in the air. He leaned closer. The air thickened quiet, pressing harder against his ears. His own breath sounded too loud. Then soft and unmistakable a note struck just one middle C, reverberating faintly. His heart jolted. The lid remained closed, no fingers upon the keys. Another note followed, then two more scattered uneven, as though someone unseen tested the sound, uncertain how to play. Daniel stepped back quickly, his chair scraping faintly on the wood floor. The music ceased. The silence that replaced it felt sharper, heavier, as though the room had inhaled and was waiting for him to react. He left quickly, not daring to look back. By evening, unease had settled deep in his chest. He dined alone, pushing his food around the plate, appetite dulled. The man he'd noticed that morning was gone, but the memory of those glassy eyes lingered. The dining room hummed with low conversation, yet Daniel felt the undercurrent, something each guest seemed to know, but refused to speak aloud. When he returned to room 217, night had already descended, pressing dark against the tall windows. The lamp flickered as he entered, as though acknowledging him. The bed remained untouched, the sheets smoothed as if waiting. He set his things aside, stood still for a long time, listening. The dripping had already started in the bathroom. Steady, patient, he approached the door cautiously, hand trembling as he pressed it open. The tub was empty, porcelain gleaming under the dim light, yet water droplets clung to the rim, sliding down in thin trails. He touched the faucet. It was dry, cool. His breath fogged faintly in the mirror, though the air shouldn't have been cold enough for that. He stepped back, heart hammering. His reflection lingered longer than it should have, eyes dull and slow to follow his own movement. Daniel shut the bathroom door firmly. He sat on the bed, rubbing his hands together, grounding himself in the solid feel of skin against skin. The hotel was playing tricks, he knew it, and yet he couldn't deny the weight of its presence. As he lay back, thunder rolled distantly over the peaks again, though the sky had been clear at dusk. Shadows slid across the ceiling, like fingers searching for something to hold. He closed his eyes, but not before seeing the dip on the far side of the mattress, an indentation forming as though someone had just lowered themselves beside him. He held his breath, and then very softly the whisper came. It was a woman's voice, this time close to his ear. The words were too faint to catch, but the tone carried an urgency, a hunger. His body stiffened, paralyzed by the nearness of something he could not see. The air smelled suddenly of damp earth and wilted roses, an aroma too heavy for the room. When he dared to open his eyes, the lamp flickered again, and the impression of a figure sat beside him, blurred and pale, as though made of mist. The figure leaned closer. His chest tightened, breath locked, and then the whisper formed clearer words. "Don't leave me here." The light extinguished, plunging him into darkness. The room plunged into silence, after the whisper thick and suffocating. Daniel's eyes strained in the dark, chasing the afterimage of that pale figure that had leaned so close. The bed dipped beside him still, though the shape itself had vanished. He dared not move. The only sound was the steady, unnatural dripping behind the closed bathroom door. Minutes stretched like hours. His heartbeat slowed, only when exhaustion began to take over. The shadows blurred weight pressing down upon him, and at last he slipped into a fitful sleep. But dreams gave him no peace. He wandered endless hallways, carpets stretching red and gold beneath his feet, each corridor folding into another like an infinite maze. At every turn, he glimpsed her, a woman in a faded dress, hair-pinned high face blurred. She walked just ahead, never turning, never allowing him close. When he tried to call, his voice dissolved, no sound leaving his lips. He woke with a start. The room was icy, his breath visible in the faint lamplight. The sheets clung damp to his skin, as though he'd been sweating for hours. He sat up quickly and froze. The indentation was still there beside him, as though his dream had never ended. For a moment he swore he could feel warmth radiating from it. Morning brought little relief. Daniel dragged himself to the dining room, pale and restless. He found the maid again, dusting along the hall. She paused, watching him with an expression that bordered on pity. "You look as though you've seen one of them," she said softly. One of what his voice cracked unsteady. Her eyes flicked around to make sure no one lingered near. Guests who never leave. She leaned closer, whispering. "Some say room 217 holds her spirit, the one who won't be forgotten." Daniel swallowed. Her spirit. The maid nodded, lips thin. Elizabeth Wilson. She was a chambermaid here long ago. There was an accident. A gas lamp exploded. She nearly died but lingered in pain for years. Some believe she still tends the room, keeping watch, or searching. Her words settled heavy in his mind. Searching. The whisper from the night before replayed. "Don't leave me here." He wanted to laugh it off, to dismiss the tale as superstition spun for tourists, but the maid's eyes did not carry mischief or exaggeration. They carried weight. Memory. That evening, Daniel wandered the halls instead of returning immediately to his room. The corridors stretched, endless patterned carpets, swallowing his footsteps. Paintings lined the walls, portraits of stern men, solemn women, landscapes that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim sconces. At the end of one hallway he paused. A door creaked slowly open by itself. Room 401. He watched, expecting someone to emerge, but the opening revealed only blackness within. A draft of cold air slipped across his skin. The door began to close again, slow and deliberate. He backed away before it latched fully. By the time he returned to 217, the sun had vanished behind the peaks. Night pressed heavily against the windows, stars buried deep in the dark sky. He sat on the bed, waiting, half expecting her to return. It didn't take long. The air chilled, carrying the faint scent of roses. The mattress shifted, dipping gently, as though someone had lowered themselves beside him again. He closed his eyes tight, but this time, the whisper came clearer. "You feel it too, don't you?" Daniel's lips trembled, words barely forming. "What? What do you want?" The silence was unbearable. Then, just by his ear, came the reply, "Not to be alone." The light flickered and steadied. This time Daniel saw her. A woman sat at the edge of the bed, transparent yet unmistakable. Her gown was old-fashioned, high-collared, frayed at the edges. Her hair, pinned back, gleamed faintly like spun silver. Her face was pale eyes, hollow lips, trembling with a sorrow deeper than words. She turned toward him, slowly meeting his gaze. Daniel's throat dried. He wanted to speak, to scream, but his body refused him. Her hand lifted, delicate and translucent, reaching toward his chest. Not menacing, pleading. The room grew colder as her hand hovered inches away, and then her face twisted. Not angry, but desperate, as though something unseen pulled her back. She whispered one final phrase before vanishing into mist. "They won't let me leave." The room fell silent. Only the steady dripping in the bathroom remained. Daniel sat trembling in the dark, clutching the sheets. Somewhere deep in the hotel, he swore he heard the faint echo of a piano playing again. This time, the melody was slow, mournful, a song that spoke of endless longing. The Stanley was alive, and it was far from finished with him. The night stretched endlessly after the apparition vanished, leaving Daniel in the suffocating silence of room 217. Every corner of the room felt alive now, as if the air itself watched him. His pulse wouldn't settle. Sleep was impossible. He sat upright against the headboard, the sheets twisted in his fists, staring into the gloom. When the first hint of dawn broke through the curtains, it was a relief so sharp it almost hurt. Pale light softened the corners of the room, chasing away the deepest shadows. The indentation beside him had disappeared, as if she had never been there at all. Only the faint smell of roses remained clinging stubbornly in the air. He dressed quickly, eager to leave the room behind. But when he reached for the doorknob, the metal was icy colder than it should have been. His hand lingered on it, hesitant. He almost expected resistance, as though the hotel itself might refuse to let him out. When the latch finally clicked, it was with a sighing groan like a voice exhaling disappointment. Downstairs, the lobby was filled with the ordinary bustle of guests. A couple checked in their luggage piled high. A child clung to her mother's arm, whining about breakfast. To them, this was only a grand old hotel, charming and picturesque. Daniel felt the urge to shout to tell them what lurked in the walls, but the words died in his throat. Who would believe him? He spotted the maid again near the staircase, her hands busy with a dust cloth. She caught his glance, and for the briefest moment her expression flickered with something that looked like warning. Then, just as quickly, she turned away, pretending to polish the banister. Daniel drifted toward the music room once more. The piano stood silent in the daylight, polished and pristine. He approached, cautiously running a finger over the smooth lid. Nothing stirred. The silence mocked him, daring him to believe it had only been his imagination. But when he turned to leave, he heard it again, a single hollow note. He spun back. The keys were untouched, the lid still closed. The sound reverberated longer than any natural tone should, hanging in the air, like a bell tolling deep underground. A shiver rippled through him. That evening, as the mountains swallowed the sun, Daniel decided to walk the grounds. He thought the open air might clear his head. The sprawling hotel loomed behind him, its white walls glowing faintly in twilight. Pines rustled in the breeze, their tall silhouettes swaying gently against the sky. He followed a gravel path that curved behind the hotel. The mountains rose like dark guardians in the distance, their peaks dusted in snow. Crickets chirped in the tall grass. For a while, it almost felt peaceful until he saw the figure. At first it was only movement in the trees, a flicker of white among the shadows. He froze. The shape resolved into a woman's form, pale dress, fluttering though no wind stirred. She stood half hidden behind a pine trunk face, obscured body still. Daniel's throat tightened. He whispered Elizabeth, though he knew better. The figure tilted its head slowly, impossibly slowly, like a puppet on invisible strings. Then, without a sound, it stepped back into the trees and vanished. The crickets stopped. The world held its breath. Daniel backed away, retracing his steps quickly, every instinct screaming to return to the relative safety of the hotel. The great white building loomed like a beacon, its windows glowing warmly, but he felt no comfort as he reached the lobby doors. That night, back in room 217, sleep eluded him again. He left the lamp burning, but its light was weak, barely pushing back the gloom. He sat on the edge of the bed shoes, still on waiting for whatever came next. The piano began first, faint but unmistakable, drifting up through the floorboards. A mournful melody heavy with longing climbed each step of the scale. Daniel closed his eyes, listening. It wasn't random notes anymore. It was music. A song composed by grief itself. And then, as though on cue, the bathroom door creaked open. The dripping stopped. He turned slowly, breath shallow. The bathtub wasn't empty anymore. Water shimmered inside, dark and still, though the faucet hadn't run. The surface quivered as if something moved beneath. His stomach knotted, his throat tight with dread. He couldn't look away. The water bulged upward suddenly, as though something pressed from below. A hand broke the surface, pale and thin fingers grasping blindly at the air. Drops fell onto the tiles, echoing louder than they should. Another hand followed. Then the shadow of a head hair, slick and black, rising slowly from the water. Daniel staggered backward, crashing into the wall, his breath ragged. The figure climbed silently from the tub. A woman drenched her gown, heavy with water, clinging to her frail frame. Her face was pale, her lips blue. She fixed her hollow eyes on him, her voice a broken whisper that rattled like water trapped in lungs. "You shouldn't have come." She stepped forward, leaving no footprints on the tile water dripping endlessly from her gown. Daniel's back pressed harder into the wall, nowhere left to go. His heart thundered. The dripping started again, this time from the ceiling above, and the light flickered out. Darkness swallowed the room the moment the bulb died, thick and suffocating. Daniel's chest heaved, lungs dragging air in sharp, uneven gasps. He couldn't see her, but he could hear her, the steady dripping of water, closer now, each drop landing with a hollow pat against the wood floor. Then came the sound of fabric dragging, sodden and heavy. She was moving toward him. His hands fumbled along the wall, searching for the switch for anything, but his fingers grazed only smooth plaster. The air grew damp and cold, chilling him to the marrow. A breath touched his cheek, not warm, icy, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and decay. His heart stopped, and then something colder still pressed against his hand. Fingers, thin, wet. Daniel flinched violently, jerking away, but the hand clamped around his wrist with impossible strength. The touch burned with frost biting his skin, and yet it felt desperate, pleading. He tried to wrench free, but the grip only tightened. Her voice rose closer than ever, whispering through waterlogged lips. "They keep me here, they'll keep you too." Panic surged through him. He tore his arm away with a guttural cry, stumbling toward the bathroom door. His shoulder hit the frame hard, sending pain shooting down his arm, but he didn't stop. He fumbled for the light switch, flipping it up and down. The bulb flickered back to life, sputtering weakly. The room was empty. The tub stood bone dry, its porcelain gleaming. No puddles, no dripping, no trail of wet footprints. Only his own ragged breathing filled the silence. Daniel collapsed against the wall, clutching his wrist. The skin was pale mottled, as if frostbite had touched it. He pressed it to his chest, heart-hammering disbelief drowning his thoughts. He knew now it wasn't his imagination. Something had touched him. The next morning, Daniel could barely drag himself from bed. He avoided the bathroom entirely, splashing water on his face from a bottle he'd brought with him. His reflection in the mirror looked haggard eyes, sunken skin, sallow. His wrist still throbbed faintly, the memory of her touch seared into him. He went downstairs, hoping for answers. The maid was nowhere to be seen. He asked the concierge if he might speak with someone who knew about the hotel's history, but the man only smiled politely and handed him a glossy pamphlet filled with cheerful tales of the Stanleys' heritage. It wasn't enough. He spent the afternoon wandering Estes Park, needing distance. The small town buzzed with tourists, restaurants, and shops, the ordinary chatter of life. But Daniel's thoughts never left the hotel, nor the words the drenched woman had whispered. "They keep me here. They'll keep you too." That evening, against all instinct, he returned to the lobby and sought out the grand staircase. He remembered the figure in white he had seen near the trees, the one who tilted her head like a broken doll. He needed to know if it was Elizabeth Wilson or someone else entirely. The hallways seemed longer that night, the air heavier. Every door he passed felt like it concealed secrets waiting to spill out. Near the top of the stairs he heard laughter, a child's giggle light and fleeting echoing down the corridor. He froze, listening. It came again, bouncing between the walls. He turned. A boy stood at the far end of the hall, no older than 7. He wore knickers and suspenders, his cap tilted askew. His small face was pale lips, blue like frostbite. The boy smiled too wide and whispered, through the sound carried perfectly, "Play with me." Daniel blinked, and the boy was gone. Only silence remained thick and unnatural. Back in room 217, Daniel braced himself for another night. He left every lamp burning, even dragged the desk lamp into the bathroom. He sat rigid in the chair, determined not to sleep. Hours ticked by. The wind rattled faintly against the window. Somewhere below the piano began again, soft at first, then swelling into a waltz, sweet, haunting, utterly out of place. Daniel clenched his fists, waiting for what would come. He knew now the hotel wasn't only haunted by Elizabeth Wilson, the drenched woman, the boy, the whisperers in the halls. This place was a cage for many, and they had noticed him. The lamp nearest the bed flickered. The scent of roses returned. The sheets on the mattress stirred, folding inward as though an invisible body reclined. Slowly, the indentation deepened. A voice drifted from the hollow. "You can't run forever, Daniel. Not here." His breath caught. The hotel knew his name. Daniel's chest constricted as the voice rippled through the room, curling into the air like smoke. It wasn't just a ghost speaking. It was something larger, deeper, as though the very bones of the Stanley had bent close to whisper in his ear. His name had no right to be spoken here, and yet it slid across the floorboards with dreadful intimacy. He bolted upright, backing into the farthest corner of the room. The indentation in the bed remained stubborn and heavy, as if an unseen weight pressed into it. The sheets shifted again, slow and deliberate, as though fingers traced invisible patterns across the fabric. The hotel was alive. He could feel it now, not merely a collection of bricks and beams, but a consciousness threaded through its corridors, feeding on memory, on grief, on fear. The lamps flickered in unison. The wallpaper seemed to pulse, the floral patterns twisting in his peripheral vision, like vines tightening around prey. A voice, not a whisper this time, but a chorus filled the room. Male, female, child layered together like hundreds speaking at once. "You are ours." Daniel stumbled for the door, yanking at the knob. It wouldn't budge. The metal scalded him now, as if the heat of a furnace lived inside it. He pulled harder, desperate, his wrist burning. Behind him, the sheets lifted. Something sat up from the bed, the shape vaguely human, but shimmering unfinished. A blurred silhouette of overlapping faces, features dissolving into one another, a nightmare collage of all who had been trapped here before. The air thickened heavy with static. His ears rang, and then silence. The door swung open with a suddenness that threw him off balance, pitching him into the hallway. He sprawled across the carpet, gasping. When he looked back, room 217 stood open, an empty lamplight spilling out innocently. Nothing moved inside. He fled down the hall, footsteps echoing too loudly. The hotel no longer felt like walls and plaster, but a throat closing slowly around him. Every corridor looked the same, lined with doors that all seemed to breathe faintly. He passed one, then another. Each knob rattled as he went by, as if the rooms inside begged to be opened. He didn't dare stop. At the landing, he paused, forcing himself to breathe. The grand chandelier above swayed, though no draft touched it. Below, the lobby glowed warmly, but it felt like a trap, a stage set for prey. And then he saw her, Elizabeth Wilson. She stood at the foot of the stairs, just as she had that first day, her hands folded neatly, her face serene. Only now, her eyes locked onto his. "You should have left," she said softly. Daniel's knees weakened. "What do you want from me?" His voice cracked. Her lips parted, but another voice spoke through her lower resonant, unmistakably not her own. "Not what we want, what it wants." The chandeliers flared bright white. A sound like a deep inhale swept through the hotel, rattling the glass panes in their frames. The floor trembled underfoot. Elizabeth's body jerked, her head tilting sharply to the side, as though yanked by unseen strings. Her mouth opened in a silent scream, eyes wide and unblinking, before her figure dissolved into mist, scattering into the stairwell like smoke. Daniel staggered backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. His mind raced. The hotel wasn't just haunted by the dead. It owned them. The apparitions weren't free spirits. They were fragments, harnessed puppets pulled by a master he couldn't see. And now it had turned its gaze fully on him. Every step creaked under his weight as he descended the stairs. The portraits along the wall seemed to follow him, the painted eyes sharper, more aware. He avoided their gaze, but the sensation drilled into him nonetheless. When he reached the lobby, the front doors stood shut, gleaming in the lamplight. He rushed toward them, hands outstretched. The handles twisted easily under his grip. He yanked them open. A wall of brick greeted him where the outside world should have been, his body locked in place. The mountains, the sky, the pine-scented air gone. Nothing but brick laid with precision impenetrable. He slammed his fists against it, shouting. The sound rang back at him, hollow and final. Behind him, the lobby murmured. The voices had returned, layered, endless. The chandeliers trembled, crystals chiming like laughter. "You are ours!" Daniel spun, pressing his back against the cold wall. The lobby seemed to swell larger, the ceiling rising, the walls stretching. Shadows elongated, twisting along the floor toward him. The piano played again, louder now, the song no longer mournful, but triumphant. A waltz for the damned, and as the music swelled, the doors of the hotel began to open one by one, each corridor spilling darkness, each shadow spilling closer. The Stanley was awake. It was hungry. Daniel pressed himself against the brick wall, where the exit had been heart-hammering, as though it might splinter his ribs. His breath came ragged, and he fought the overwhelming urge to close his eyes, to pretend none of it was real. But the hotel left no room for denial. Every second it pressed in closer. Every second it fed. The piano played louder, the notes echoing like taunts. Each open door along the lobby's corridor exhaled darkness thick and alive, spilling across the carpet like black water. The shadows slithered toward him, curling like fingers eager to grasp his ankles. He bolted across the room, forcing his body to move. His shoes sank slightly into the carpet, as though the floor had softened. Portraits along the walls seemed to grin wider as he passed their brushstrokes, warping teeth gleaming sharp under the flicker of the chandeliers. He sprinted toward the staircase, gripping the banister to pull himself upward. But as he ascended, the steps seemed to stretch endlessly, each riser taller than the last. He climbed, panting, legs burning, until the lobby was gone beneath him, replaced by a bottomless gulf of darkness. And then, the carpet under his hands shifted. Not carpet anymore. Wood. Cold, damp rotting. His knees buckled. The staircase dissolved beneath him, and suddenly he was standing in a hallway that should not exist. The air was different here. Older, dank, smelling of mildew and earth. The walls were stripped of wallpaper boards, exposed and splintered. Dim bulbs flickered in iron sconces, casting jagged shadows. Daniel turned slowly, swallowing hard. This was no guest corridor. It felt like a spine running through the hotel's hidden body, secret and forbidden. Doors lined the hallway, each numbered in peeling paint. 302, 303, 304. The numbers went on endlessly, bending away in a curve too sharp to belong to the building he knew. From behind one of the doors came a sound, a sob, thin and pitiful, like someone had been crying for so long they'd forgotten how to stop. Daniel's skin prickled. He knew he should run, but his feet drew him closer, pulled by something beyond will. His hand hovered above the knob of room 304. The wood trembled under his palm, as though something within was pressing back, eager for release. He pushed it open. The room was small, oppressive. Bare bulbs swung above their glow, weak and jaundiced. Against the far wall sat a woman in a nightdress, knees pulled tight to her chest. Her hair hung in wet ropes clinging to her pale face. She looked up slowly, and her eyes locked onto his. "They wouldn't let me leave," she whispered. Her voice cracked like paper tearing. "I tried. I begged. But the doors closed. The walls grew taller. And then..." She trailed off, trembling. "Then it swallowed me." Her words struck Daniel like cold knives. "They want you too," she added, inching forward on her knees. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, as if her joints bent at angles they shouldn't. "They'll drink you dry, piece by piece, until you belong to the wood and plaster." Daniel stumbled back, shaking his head. "No, I don't belong here. I didn't choose this." The woman's face twisted, her lips splitting into a grotesque smile. Her voice deepened, dropping into a guttural rasp that no human throat could shape. "Choice was never yours." Her body convulsed. Her skin darkened, cracks spreading like veins across her flesh. Her hair writhed, twisting like roots. She began to crawl toward him, her limbs scraping against the floor with a bone-grating sound. Daniel slammed the door shut, chest heaving. The knob rattled furiously, her fists pounding from the other side, the wood groaning under the assault. He backed away, shaking. The hallway pulsed once like the walls themselves inhaled. Every door along the hall banged open at once. Dozens of figures stepped out, each broken in different ways. Faces, gaunt eyes, hollow skin bruised or charred. Some dripping with water, some with ropes still around their necks. All silent, all staring directly at him. Daniel froze, his mind white with terror. And then together, they spoke in a single unified voice. The hotel keeps what it hungers for. The shadows pooled around his feet, seeping through the cracks in the wood, pulling at his shoes. The corridor tilted, gravity dragging him forward into the swarm of hollow-eyed figures. He screamed, wrenching himself free, and ran. The hallway stretched, infinitely bending, folding, doubling back on itself. No matter how far he sprinted, the numbers on the doors repeated 302, 303, 304. The sobbing, the whispers, the rattling knobs, they followed in endless chorus. And in the distance, barely audible under the chaos, came the sound of children laughing, playful, innocent, terrifying. Daniel's lungs burned as he tore down the corridor, the endless sequence of numbers flashing past in his peripheral vision. 302, 303, 304, again and again repeating like a broken film reel. His body screamed for rest, yet the floor dragged beneath him, tilting at angles that made running feel like stumbling through quicksand. The laughter grew louder. Not from behind him anymore, but all around, echoing through the warped walls. Children's voices high and bright, weaving between his panicked breaths. A nursery rhyme took shape in their cadence-fractured words, bouncing between the doors. "Run, run, little man, catch you fast as best we can." The lights overhead flickered violently. With each blink of darkness, the figures from the open rooms drew closer. Shadows inched down the hallway, their movements unnervingly fast, like spiders darting between bursts of light. Daniel's vision blurred. Sweat stung his eyes. His heartbeat thundered against his skull, drowning out reason. He wanted to scream, but his throat locked tight. And then the corridor shifted. The wallpaper peeled away in ribbons, curling to reveal stone walls, beneath ancient stone damp and uneven, as though the hotel's foundation was exposing its true skeleton. The numbers on the doors bled paint, dripping into black puddles that spread across the warped floor. When Daniel blinked again, the hallway was no longer a hallway at all. It was a cavern. He froze, stumbling to a stop. The air reeked of wet earth and rust. Above the ceiling had dissolved into jagged rock stalactites glistening with condensation. A low rumble thrummed beneath his feet like some massive beast breathing deep within the ground. The doors had vanished, replaced by stone archways. Through them, shadows shifted, but not human ones. Shapes too large, too malformed to belong to anything he knew. One of the shapes moved closer. Daniel's knees nearly buckled as it emerged into the dim glow. Its body was tall, impossibly thin, with arms that stretched far too long, dragging across the stone floor. Its face, or where a face should have been, was a smear of darkness, a hollow absence that pulled at the edges of sight. It bent low, impossibly low, until its head was inches from his. Though it had no mouth, he felt its words crawl directly into his skull. "You dream in our marrow now." The sound wasn't sound. It was thought heavy and wet, pressing against his mind like fingers trying to pry it open. Daniel staggered back, clutching his head. He felt the walls of his sanity buckle. The hotel wasn't just trapping him, it was reshaping him, bending perception, until up became down, until reality thinned into nightmare. His watch beeped faintly on his wrist. He glanced at it through blurred vision. Midnight. He could have sworn hours had passed, yet the hands had barely moved since he'd checked before. Time had no meaning here. The cavern pulsed. The walls breathed. Faces appeared briefly in the stone, stretching outward as though screaming to escape before melting back into the rock. Men, women, children, all fused into the foundation itself. Daniel stumbled forward, clutching the jagged wall for balance. His fingers brushed across cold, wet stone. But beneath the surface, he felt skin. It twitched under his touch, recoiling alive. A shriek pierced the cavern, high and piercing, reverberating through every archway. He covered his ears, but the sound was inside his skull, rattling his bones. Shadows surged through the arches, rushing toward him like a tide. The children's voices returned louder now, their sing-song chant twisting into cruel laughter. "Run, run, little man. Stanley keeps you if it can." Daniel bolted. His feet splashed through shallow water, echoing across the chamber. The cavern twisted paths branching in impossible directions, each archway pulling him deeper. He ran blind, his own ragged breathing, the only anchor he had left, until suddenly, light, a pale golden glow spilled through one of the passages. Unlike the sickly flicker of the hotel's bulbs, this light was warm, steady, almost holy. He stumbled toward it, every instinct screaming that this was salvation. He pushed through the archway, chest heaving, and found himself standing in the hotel ballroom. The transition was seamless. one step from stone to polished floor, from cavern echoes to the soft hum of chandeliers. The grand ballroom stretched around him, pristine, immaculate. Tables lined with crisp linens, a piano playing by itself in the corner, golden light bathing everything in false serenity. Guests filled the room. Men in tailored suits, women in glittering gowns, their laughter drifting lazily through the air. Champagne flutes clinked. Music swelled, but none of them had faces. Each guest turned as one toward him, their heads tilted in unison, a grotesque ballet. Where eyes and mouths should have been were smooth planes of flesh, blank and perfect. Daniel's scream lodged in his throat. The faceless guests began to dance. Couples twirled across the floor, arms wrapped around each other in elegant steps, their blank faces pressed close. The air grew colder with every spin, frost crawling up the walls over the chandelier into the marrow of his bones. He stumbled back toward the door, but it had vanished. The ballroom was sealed, and the faceless dancers, step by synchronized step, were moving toward him. The music swelled, its once gentle melody twisting into something sharp and discordant. Each piano key banged like a hammer striking bone. Every violin string stretched until it wailed like a human scream. The dancers advanced in smooth, gliding steps, their faceless heads tilting with eerie precision, their blank skin reflecting the chandelier's frostbitten glow. Daniel's breath came in shallow gasps. His back pressed against the cool marble of the wall, fingers clawing at the surface for an exit that no longer existed. The faceless crowd circled him, moving closer. Step by step, their silk gowns brushing the floor, their shoes tapping in unnatural rhythm. One figure broke from the formation. A tall man in a tuxedo, his shoulders broad, his posture regal. He moved with elegance, each step deliberate like a host welcoming a guest. As he reached Daniel, he extended a gloved hand in invitation. Daniel shook his head violently, trembling. No, I'm not part of this." The faceless man tilted his head, and then impossibly the smooth flesh began to split. A line appeared where a mouth should be, a jagged seam tearing open. Teeth, too many teeth, unfurled inside, sharp as glass, smiling wide. "Everyone is part of this," the voice hissed, though the mouth barely moved. The words were velvet and venom sliding straight into Daniel's ears. The dancers froze, their blank faces turned toward him in perfect stillness. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the grotesque smile of the faceless host. Daniel bolted, shoving past the figures. Their bodies were cold, pliant, bending slightly as he pushed through, but none tried to stop him. Instead, they turned in unison, watching him flee, their heads rotating at unnatural angles. He stumbled across the polished floor shoes, slipping against the ice that now spread across the marble. Frost crackled under his soles, climbing higher along the walls, webbing over the golden chandeliers. His breath puffed white in front of him. At the far end of the ballroom, a door materialized, massive, ornate, with brass handles shaped like twin serpents. Daniel didn't hesitate. He sprinted, muscles screaming, and yanked it open. Darkness. He plunged headfirst into it, the ballroom vanishing behind him. The ground dropped away. His stomach lurched as he tumbled through void, falling and falling with no end. His scream dissolved into the windless silence, his body weightless, directionless, and then impact. The floor met him with bone-jarring force, though it didn't break him. He groaned, rolling onto his side, clutching his ribs. His vision steadied, adjusting to a dim, flickering light. He was no longer in the ballroom. This place felt older. The room stretched wide, cavernous, but not natural. Its walls were rough stone, lined with rotting beams, as if the foundations of the hotel had been dug out into catacombs. Along the walls were alcoves, and within each alcove lay a body, some skeletal, some still fleshed their faces, contorted in agony. Daniel staggered to his feet. The air was heavy, stale with the stench of centuries. Candles burned in iron sconces, their flames sputtering with black smoke. At the center of the chamber stood a massive ledger on a stone pedestal. Its cover was cracked leather, its pages yellowed with age. The faint glow of the candles seemed to bend toward it, as though the book were drinking their light. Daniel's legs moved before his mind could protest. He approached breath shallow. His fingers brushed the cover, and the leather felt warm, pulsing faintly, like living flesh. The ledger opened on its own. Pages fluttered, flipping past names scrawled in heavy ink, each accompanied by dates that stretched back more than a century. Guests, thousands of them. He read the entries, his throat tight. 1909, Eleanor Finch lost to the walls. 1922, Harold Kincaid claimed by the river beneath. 1947, Margaret Cole absorbed in the ballroom. 1965, Joseph Turner vanished into the glass, and then his stomach dropped. 23, Daniel Hale, to be taken tonight. His hands trembled. The ink on his name was still wet, glistening as though freshly written. A sound drifted from behind him, a whisper, low and reverent, echoing from every alcove. They knew you were coming. Daniel spun eyes wide. The bodies in the alcoves had begun to stir. Jawbones creaked open, empty sockets turning toward him. With painful slowness, the long dead began to crawl from their resting places, fingers dragging along the stone floor. The whisper grew louder, layered 1,000 voices folding together into one. They always know. Daniel stumbled backward against the ledger, his mind fracturing under the weight of it all. The hotel wasn't cursed, it was alive. It had memory hunger, a will that stretched back through decades. Every guest who stayed too long was written, fated, consumed, and now it was his turn. The dead surged forward, clawing at the stone, their mouths opening in silent screams. Their skeletal hands reached for him, stretching, cracking, breaking, but never stopping. Daniel's only thought was escape. He shoved himself away from the pedestal and bolted for the far end of the chamber, where a narrow passage gaped like a throat in the wall. Behind him, the ledger's pages flipped again, whispering as if in triumph. 23, Daniel Hale claimed. The passage swallowed him whole. The walls pressed close, damp stone, scraping his shoulders as he stumbled into the narrow throat of the catacombs. His breath rattled in his chest, echoing down the tunnel in uneven bursts. Behind him, the chorus of whispers pursued an ocean of sound, growing louder with every desperate step. Daniel's fingers skimmed the wall to guide himself, but the stone was slick when he pulled his hand away. His skin was smeared with something dark, metallic. The smell of rust and decay clung to his fingertips. He didn't dare stop. The tunnel sloped downward, winding like the coiled gut of some great beast. Shadows darted ahead as though mocking him, fleeing just before his eyes could focus. The air was thick with damp rot, heavier with each turn. His chest heaved, lungs aching. Then came the footsteps. They weren't his, soft, deliberate, echoing behind him. Not the shambling scrape of the risen dead, but a measured cadence. Polished shoes against stone. He glanced back over his shoulder. The tunnel was empty, the flicker of candlelight long gone. Yet the sound continued, matching his pace, drawing closer. "Who's there?" His voice cracked, desperate, swallowed by the dark. Silence, and then a whisper right against his ear. Though no one stood there. "We've all been here before." Daniel's legs nearly gave out. He stumbled forward deeper into the winding passage, his heartbeat drowning out everything else. The walls seemed to narrow further, stone ribs tightening around him until he had to turn sideways, scraping through. His chest tightened with the claustrophobic squeeze, every breath more shallow than the last. Finally, the passage opened. He spilled out into another chamber, collapsing to his knees. The space was vast, hollow, supported by crumbling columns that leaned like weary sentinels. Pools of stagnant water reflected the dim glow of lanterns that swung gently from rusted hooks. But the chamber was not empty. Figures lined the far wall, more defined than the skeletal remains in the alcoves. Men and women in faded attire, old suits, long gowns, their garments tattered but intact. Their faces were pale lips, blue eyes, sunken, but not lifeless. They watched him with unnerving stillness, heads cocking in perfect unison as he staggered into their sight. One woman stepped forward. Her dress shimmered faintly with the dust of another time sequence catching the weak light. Her voice was soft melodic, carrying a sadness that pressed on the air. "You shouldn't have come here, Daniel." He froze. The sound of his name on her lips hollowed him out. His throat closed, unable to form words. She continued drifting closer, bare feet, soundless on the stone. "We didn't mean to either. None of us did. We checked in. We laughed, we danced, we drank. And then the hotel decided, her eyes, pale as glass, locked onto his. It always decides." The other figures stirred their whispers, rising like wind through dead branches. Some pressed hands against the walls, and the stone flexed beneath their touch as though alive, as though it breathed with them. Daniel staggered back. I don't belong here." The woman's lips curved, not into a smile, but something far worse, a knowing expression, tender, yet merciless. "None of us thought we did." The chamber shuddered. Dust rained from the ceiling. Water rippled in the pools, disturbed by vibrations deep below. The sound of grinding stone filled the air, as though the very bones of the place shifted. Daniel's gaze snapped to the columns. Shapes bulged from the stone faces, pushing outward, mouths opening in silent screams before melting back into the rock. A man in a bowler hat, a child clutching a doll, a maid with hollow eyes. Their anguish bled into the very walls. He staggered backward, straight into another figure. Cold hands gripped his shoulders. He spun, gasping. The man behind him was tall, his suit pristine, his face sharp and recognizable from old photographs Daniel had once seen online. His breath hitched. He knew that face. Freeland Stanley, the founder himself. The man's eyes bore into his sharp and gleaming with something beyond death. His voice calm, yet edged with authority, filled the cavern. "You think you're dreaming," Stanley said. "But you are seeing. The truth beneath the wallpaper, the rot beneath the chandeliers. My hotel was born with breath, with hunger. I fed it, and it has never stopped feeding." Daniel shook his head violently, trying to tear away from the iron grip. No, this isn't real." Stanley leaned closer, his words a hiss against Daniel's ear. "It is the only thing that is." The chamber roared. The figures surged forward, the pools boiling as shadows erupted from the water, stretching into clawed shapes. The whispers became wails, the grief and rage of a century given voice. Daniel broke free, sprinting toward a passage at the far end of the chamber, his legs burning with panic. The voices of the dead chased him, rising to a deafening crescendo. As he plunged into the darkness once more, the last thing he heard was Stanley's voice, steady and unyielding. "You're ours now." The tunnel twisted downward, each turn sharper, more jagged than the last. Daniel's breath scraped his throat as he ran, his footsteps splashing through shallow pools of icy water. Yet every few strides the tunnel seemed to change. The stone wasn't always stone. Sometimes it looked like plaster walls with faded wallpaper, sometimes old wooden panels creaking under invisible strain. He blinked hard, sweat and fear clouding his vision. The air shifted too, no longer only damp earth, but tinged with faint perfumes, cigar smoke, lilac powder, the scent of whiskey and firewood. He was no longer running through just the catacombs. He was running through the Stanleys' memories. The first vision struck without warning. The tunnel widened into a corridor lined with grand doors, their brass handles gleaming as though newly polished. Daniel slowed, heart pounding, the sense of wrongness twisting his gut. He reached out to touch one door, fingertips brushing the wood, and the air fractured. Suddenly, he was inside a guest room. A woman sat at a vanity, brushing her hair, humming a soft tune. The lamp on her table flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. She paused, her reflection in the mirror staring directly at Daniel. Her lips moved. He's here. The room exploded in black smoke. When it cleared, Daniel was back in the tunnel. The woman gone, the door gone. Only the scent of her lilac perfume clung to him. He ran harder, panic clawing his chest. Another turn, another rupture. This time, a wide staircase unfolded before him, its banisters polished oak. Ghostly light spilled from a chandelier above, throwing rainbows across the hall. Daniel's legs carried him upward even though he knew he shouldn't climb. Halfway up the steps, cracked beneath him. He looked down, only to see flames licking the underside of the wood, smoke billowing upward. The air seared his lungs. From below, voices screamed, dozens at once, pleading, burning, vanishing. Daniel lurched forward, but the staircase dissolved beneath his feet, leaving him plunging through smoke into the tunnel once again, landing hard on the wet stone. His ribs throbbed, but he forced himself upright. The hotel was not only showing him its hunger, it was feeding him its history, its wounds. He stumbled forward, dizzy. The walls pulsed faintly, and within the stone he could see faces pressing outward, as if caught between moments. A bellhop in a crisp uniform, a young child clutching a stuffed bear, a man in a bowler hat coughing blood into a handkerchief. Their mouths opened and shut, but their voices were clear inside his skull. We stayed. We laughed. We never left. Daniel clamped his hands over his ears, but the voices seeped through, cold and relentless. The tunnel narrowed again. A faint light glowed ahead. He stumbled toward it, half believing it might be an exit. Instead, he emerged into a vast ballroom, but not the frostbitten, silent one from before. This was alive music. Swelled golden chandeliers sparkled. Couples twirled in elegant gowns. The air was warm, filled with laughter and clinking glasses. For a moment, Daniel faltered. Was it real? Could it be? Then he noticed their eyes. Every dancer's eyes glowed faintly blue like gas flames. Their smiles were fixed too wide, painted across their faces like masks. A waiter passed close by, carrying a tray of champagne flutes. His face was familiar. Daniel's breath caught. He had seen that face online in the old archives, the same photograph that had shown Freeland Stanley himself. The waiter leaned close, whispering with a smile that never shifted. "Drink, Daniel. You must toast before the hotel claims you." The glass on the tray trembled as if eager for him to take it. Daniel stumbled back, shaking his head, refusing. The music swelled again, discordant beneath its polish, and all at once the dancers froze mid-step. Dozens of glowing eyes turned toward him. The music cut off. Silence fell thick and oppressive. One by one, the dancers began to move slowly, deliberately stepping toward him in perfect unison. Daniel turned and ran, shoving through the double doors at the edge of the ballroom. The doors slammed shut behind him. He found himself in a long, endless corridor. Doors lined both sides, every knob gleaming, every frame identical. As he took a step forward, the corridor stretched, extending endlessly ahead of him. Behind the doors came sounds. A woman sobbing, a man begging, the unmistakable rattling of chains, scratching, clawing, something tearing at wood. Daniel's hands trembled as he reached for the nearest handle. He didn't want to open it, but his body betrayed him, compelled by some deeper force. The knob turned under his palm. The door swung open. Inside the room was bare except for a mirror, and in the mirror, Daniel saw not his own reflection, but a man in old-fashioned clothes staring back at him. A man whose eyes were full of terror. The reflection raised a hand, pressing it against the glass. Daniel's hand lifted too, though he hadn't meant to. Their palms met on the surface. The reflection's lips formed the words "run." Then the glass shattered. Shards sprayed outward, slicing his arms and face. Daniel stumbled back into the corridor, blood dripping down his cheek. The door slammed shut on its own, and the voices behind the other doors swelled into a deafening chorus. Every single one screamed his name. "Daniel, Daniel, Daniel." The corridor trembled, the ceiling cracking, the walls bending inward, as though the hotel itself were inhaling him. He ran, but every door he passed had his name engraved upon it now, etched deep into the wood. There was no escape. The corridor shuddered, as if alive, every door frame breathing in time with the pounding of Daniel's heart. The air pressed against him, heavy and suffocating. His name still rang from the walls, whispered, chanted, screamed all at once, until he could hardly breathe for the sound of it. He pressed forward, desperate to find an end, but the hallway stretched on endlessly. Each time he thought the far wall was in sight, it slid farther away, lengthening, deepening into impossible distance. The floor shifted beneath his feet, sloping downward. The overhead lamps flickered and burned out one by one, plunging sections of the hall into darkness. In that dark, shadows moved. They weren't cast by him. They slithered across the walls, independently, figures of men and women pacing behind the doors, their heads tilted toward him, listening. Daniel's chest heaved. His arm stung where shards of glass had cut him. He wiped blood from his cheek, but it only smeared across his skin, the coppery tang rising into his nose. And then he made the mistake of stopping. The silence that followed was worse than the voices. A single door to his left clicked open. Slowly, a faint shaft of light spilled across the floor. Daniel froze, every muscle straining. The gap widened. Inside, a room flickered into view. Not like the hotel's polished suites, this one was wrong. The walls were damp concrete, the ceiling low, and in the middle stood a single chair with leather straps fastened to its arms. And seated there was himself, his own body slumped, eyes wide open and clouded with death. The corpse's head twitched a slow, broken movement, and its lips parted. A dry rasp scraped out. "You never left, Daniel." The word struck like a blade. He stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. His dead reflection tilted its head bones, cracking eyes rolling upward until only the whites showed. The door slammed shut so hard the floor quaked beneath him. He bolted forward, refusing to look at any more doors, but the hallway was merciless. Every few steps another door creaked open, showing him visions, each one worse than the last. A banquet hall, where a long table stretched to infinity, every seat filled by silent guests with no faces, their hands twitching on silver cutlery. A nursery rocking horses swaying on their own, a mobile turning with no breeze, tiny laughter spilling from empty cribs, a bathroom tiled in white where the tub overflowed not with water, but with thick black sludge that writhed as though alive. Each glimpse seared itself into him, carving terror deeper into his chest. He couldn't tell anymore whether he was glimpsing the hotel's past, its victims, or his own future. The corridor pulsed again, and this time, it wasn't endless. It folded inward, bending like a rib cage snapping shut. The doors shifted their frames, angling toward him, until the hallway was narrowing into a funnel. At the far end, a single door remained. Its handle gleamed like wet bone. Daniel knew he had no choice but to open it. He reached it, fingers trembling as they closed around the knob. The metal burned cold into his skin. The door swung inward with a groan, and he was swallowed by pitch black. Not absence of light, something thicker, heavier, like liquid shadow. It clung to him, muffling his movements, filling his lungs. He staggered forward, blind hands stretched out, and then the darkness parted. He was standing in room 217. The bed was neatly made, the old-fashioned lamps casting warm yellow light. The carpet smelled faintly of dust and lavender. It was exactly as he had seen it earlier, untouched. Yet he wasn't alone. On the bed sat a woman, her back to him, her hair pinned in an elegant bun. She hummed softly, sewing something in her lap. Her hands moved with delicate precision, needle flashing in the lamplight. Daniel swallowed hard. "Hello," his voice cracked. The woman stilled. Slowly she turned her head. Her face was waxen. Her eyes clouded her smile, thin and brittle. In her lap she wasn't sewing cloth, she was sewing flesh. A patchwork of skin, pale and bruised, stitched into a grotesque shape Daniel couldn't comprehend. His stomach lurched. The woman tilted her head, regarding him with quiet curiosity. "You're early," she whispered. Her voice was dry, brittle as dead leaves. Daniel backed toward the door, but it was gone. The wall was seamless, trapping him. The woman rose her creation, slipping from her lap onto the floor with a wet slap. It twitched, shuddering, trying to crawl toward him on its unfinished limbs. Daniel pressed himself against the wall, panic clawing through him. The woman stepped closer, needle glinting in her hand. "You'll do nicely," she murmured, and the lights went out. The darkness in room 217 was absolute, a suffocating velvet that pressed against Daniel's skin. He couldn't see his own hands, couldn't make sense of the space around him, yet he knew he wasn't alone. The sound gave it away, the faint scrape of a needle pulling through flesh, the wet shuffle of something dragging itself closer. A brittle hum cracked and tuneless, circling the room like a whisper carried by smoke. Daniel's breath rattled in his throat. He groped backward, palms slapping against the wall, searching for the door. There was none. His hand scraped over wallpaper that rippled like skin, as if the wall itself were breathing. Something brushed his ankle. He kicked violently, boot connecting with something soft and yielding. A choked cry escaped the dark, half-human, half-infantile, and the thing skittered back across the floorboards, nails scraping wood. Daniel's stomach twisted, the sound too close, too alive. Then came the whisper right beside his ear. "You're coming apart, Daniel. Let me help stitch you back together." He spun, slamming his shoulder against the wall, but the seamstress wasn't there. Only her humming, now drifting from the ceiling above. His vision flickered suddenly, like a light bulb straining in its socket, and for an instant the room was visible in a pale bluish glow. What he saw nearly dropped him to his knees. The stitched figure crawled across the carpet toward him, an amalgam of arms, legs, and torsos, sewn crudely together, its face a blank patch of mismatched skin threads crisscrossing where features should be. It gurgled wetly, dragging itself forward, and the seamstress. She was on the ceiling, crawling like a spider, her dress hanging toward the floor, her head twisted at an impossible angle as her clouded eyes locked onto him. Her needle glittered between her fingers, impossibly long now, trailing a thread that pulsed faintly like a vein. The light died again, plunging him back into blindness. His pulse thundered, every nerve screaming for escape. He edged along the wall, desperate for some break, some seam that might be a door. The stitched creature wheezed closer, its weight shaking the floorboards. Then under his palm, Daniel felt a hollow space, a subtle indentation in the wall, round and metallic. A doorknob. He twisted hard, the wall splitting open into another doorframe. Without thinking, he hurled himself through, slamming it behind him. He stumbled into yet another corridor, gasping dizzy from the stench of lavender and rot that clung to him. The stitched whispers trailed faintly from behind the door, but they didn't follow. The new hall was dim, lined with oil lamps that burned low their flames, bending unnaturally toward him as he walked. He felt like prey, every shadow drawn by the hotel's breath. A grandfather clock stood at the far end, tall and ornate. Its pendulum swayed, though no sound came from it. No tick, no chime, only the oppressive silence that seemed to thicken with every step closer. When he reached it, he froze. The clock face didn't hold numbers. Instead, each notch was engraved with a year. 1911, 1923, 1945, 1962. Each one marked tragedies he half remembered from his research into the Stanleys' history. Guests lost, unexplained deaths, whispered hauntings. The hands of the clock pointed not to the present, but to a year far ahead, 2035. Daniel's throat tightened. That was 20 years from now. He leaned closer, heart hammering, and for an instant the glass shifted. His reflection stared back at him, not his living self, but the corpse from room 217, stitches biting across his cheeks and lips, his body bound in thread like a marionette. The pendulum stopped. The hotel exhaled, and from the walls around him dozens of doors burst open at once. Figures spilled into the corridor, ghostly guests in dinner jackets, maids with hollow eyes, children clutching broken toys. Their mouths hung open, but no sound came, only the thundering silence that crushed him. They shuffled forward, dozens of them, a slow tide of the Stanley's prisoners, all reaching for him with skeletal fingers. Daniel staggered back against the clock, trapped nowhere to run. The nearest figure, a man in a bowler hat, stretched his hand toward Daniel's face. His skin peeled away as he moved, revealing a black void where his features should be. From within that void, a voice finally spoke. "You belong here." The corridor collapsed into black. The blackness swallowed him whole, and for a moment, Daniel felt himself falling not through air, but through something thicker, like tar or oil. He struggled to breathe as the voices pressed in on him from every side. They weren't whispers now. They were screams. When his vision snapped back, he was no longer standing in the corridor. He was inside them. The tide of spirits had not pulled him away physically. They had pulled him into their memory. The air reeked of kerosene and scorched wood. He stood in a ballroom, but it wasn't the elegant one the Stanley was known for. This was ruin. Flames licked the walls, curling through beams, and smoke blackened the ceiling. Guests stumbled around him, coughing, choking eyes wild with terror as chandeliers crashed to the floor. A woman in pearls clawed at the air, her hands passing straight through Daniel's arm as though he weren't there. He wasn't. He realized with horror that he was trapped inside their final moments. The fire spread impossibly fast, moving with the precision of intent, like a predator hunting. The heat pressed against Daniel's skin, but he couldn't burn. He could only watch. A child's scream pierced through the chaos. He turned, seeing a little girl in a white dress clinging to her doll eyes wide with panic. She bolted toward the exit, but the door slammed shut in her face, the handle glowing red hot, trapping her inside. Daniel tried to move to her to wrench it open, but his hands passed through it like smoke. The girl turned back to him. For a moment, their eyes locked. She saw him. She saw him, and then the flames closed over her. Daniel fell to his knees, choking on grief he didn't understand. Around him, bodies collapsed into smoke faces, melting away. The ballroom itself dissolved, replaced by another scene. He was standing in a bathtub, water rising around his ankles. The room was narrow, claustrophobic, and the flickering overhead bulb revealed tile streaked with rust. He looked down. The water was crimson, and floating face down, a young man's body drifted toward him. The skin was swollen, the lips tinged blue. When Daniel bent to turn the figure over his chest, hollow with dread, he recoiled. The corpse had his own face. The water rose, quickly sloshing over the tub's rim, flooding the floor. He stumbled back, but the bathroom's door was gone. The water climbed his calves, his thighs dragging him down. His reflection stared up from the bloodied surface, lifeless and glassy-eyed, pulling him into its gaze. Daniel thrashed, gasping, but no sound came. With a violent lurch, he was ripped from the bathroom and hurled into yet another memory. This time he stood in the hallway again, but it was decades earlier. The carpet was fresh, vibrant red, and the lamps glowed steady. At the far end, a man in a bellhop's uniform leaned against a cart, his face pale and expression blank. The bellhop glanced at Daniel. Slowly, he lifted one finger to his lips. "Quiet," he whispered. From behind the closed doors, muffled cries began. Pleas for help, fists pounding the walls, nails scraping wood. Dozens of voices trapped and begging. The sound built until it became unbearable, rattling the very glass in the lamps. The bellhop didn't move, his eyes fixed on Daniel as if testing whether he could endure it. Daniel's ears rang. His chest felt like it would split. He screamed, but no sound escaped. The bellhop tilted his head, then gave a single nod. And with that nod, every door burst open at once. From them, the dead poured out, not like the ghosts he'd seen before. These were twisted, broken remnants, burnt, drowned, strangled their bodies locked in the exact state of their final moments. They surged toward him, dozens, maybe hundreds, pulling him down into their sea of death. Hands clutched his throat. Fingers dug into his arms. A weight pressed him to the floor. Daniel struggled wildly, heart slamming in his chest. He could feel their anguish, each one pressing its last moment of pain into him. His vision blurred. His lungs screamed for air, and as the tide of spirits consumed him, one voice hissed through the noise. It was the seamstress. "You see now," she whispered. "The hotel keeps what it is given, and it wants you." The world snapped to black. When Daniel opened his eyes, he was lying on the floor of room 217 again, gasping like a man pulled from drowning. The bed was untouched. The lamps glowed softly. The air smelled of lavender, but the stitches around the room, tiny threads poking from the wallpaper, crossing the carpet, binding the curtains, hadn't been there before. The room itself was beginning to sew him in. The lavender air was heavier now, dense enough that every breath scraped his throat. Daniel sat up slowly, his palms damp against the carpet. That's when he noticed it. The fibers under his hands weren't carpet at all. They were thread. Thick, interwoven, knotted like veins pulsing faintly with something alive. He staggered to his feet, heart hammering. The room had changed. Where once there were walls, he now saw layers of fabric, stitched together seams running like scars across the plaster. The ceiling sagged under the weight of dangling cloth, and the curtains weren't curtains anymore. They were strips of stitched skin swaying gently, though no breeze passed through. The seamstress's voice drifted through the room, soft and sweet. "You're home now, Daniel. Don't fight it. Let me keep you whole." Her needle gleamed in the lamplight, though she herself was nowhere to be seen. Only her voice stitched itself into the air, weaving through every corner. Daniel pressed his hand against the wall. The thread writhed under his touch, pulling tighter, sealing shut any gaps that might have been an exit. The door he had used before was gone, replaced with nothing but a thick, cross-hatched seam. The realization made his stomach twist. The room was closing in on him. The bed creaked suddenly, its sheets tightening like a shroud being drawn. The mattress itself bulged, as though something writhed beneath it. Slowly, a hand pushed up through the fabric fingers, long and stitched at the knuckles. Another followed, then a face forced its way through the linen mouth sewn shut eyes wide, and wet, muffled screams vibrating through the thread. Daniel stumbled back, crashing into the nightstand. The lamp toppled glass, shattering across the floor. In the flare of light, he saw more faces pressing against the walls, their outlines bulging beneath the stitched wallpaper, each one struggling to push through. Dozens of them. The seamstress hummed louder, her lullaby circling the room. The threads tightened around the trapped figures, binding them back into silence. Daniel's chest tightened. If he stayed, he would be next. He scanned the room wildly, searching for weakness. His gaze fell on the mirror above the dresser. Unlike the rest of the room, it was untouched, its surface still smooth, reflecting him back with uncanny clarity. He stepped closer. His reflection wavered. Not a mirror, he realized. A window. On the other side, the hallway glimmered faintly, impossible, yet undeniable. With no choice left, he raised the shattered lamp base and hurled it at the glass. The mirror cracked, not shattered, but split into jagged lines like spider webs crawling outward. A cold wind rushed through, carrying the smell of pine trees and old wood smoke. For a moment, Daniel thought he heard voices in that draft, faint and distant, urging him forward. He slammed his fist against the mirror again. A shard broke free, clattering to the floor, leaving a hole just wide enough to see through. Beyond it, the hallway stretched on, but not the same one he had walked before. This one was darker, narrower. The wallpaper torn, the carpets rotted. The forbidden wing of the Stanley, a place not meant for guests. The seamstress's humming stopped. silence pressed in thick and unnatural. Then from everywhere at once her voice coiled around him. "You tear what I make. You ruin what I sow." Her anger vibrated through the very walls, making the threads convulse and snap. The bulging faces pressed harder against the seams, their muffled screams bleeding through. Daniel didn't hesitate. He dropped to the floor, crawling through the jagged opening in the mirror. The glass tore his shirt, sliced his arm, but he didn't stop. He forced himself through until he tumbled out onto the carpet of the forbidden hallway, gasping, skin slick with blood. The moment he landed, the mirror sealed behind him, threads knitting rapidly over the frame until no trace remained. The hallway was silent. No lamps glowed. Only the faint silver wash of moonlight leaked through cracks in the boarded windows. Dust lay thick across the carpet, disturbed only by the trail of footprints that stretched deeper into the wing. Footprints not his own. Daniel rose shakily, pressing his bleeding arm to his chest. He followed the tracks, each step echoing too loudly in the suffocating quiet. The walls leaned inward, as though the entire wing had been abandoned for centuries. The trail led him to a door at the very end. A heavy oak door carved with patterns that were almost familiar loops of thread needles crossing stitches binding the wood itself. He hesitated. His body screamed to turn back, but there was nowhere else to go. He touched the handle. It was cold, and from within, faint but certain, he heard a voice whisper his name. "Daniel." The door swung open. The door groaned as it opened, the sound like a long, aching sigh. Daniel hesitated at the threshold, his breath misting in the chill that seeped from within. He expected darkness, but the room beyond flickered with a faint amber glow, as though lit by candles, long since burned down to their stubs. He stepped inside. The air smelled of dust, old fabric, and something sharper iron, almost metallic. The walls were lined with cabinets, their glass fronts cracked, their interiors filled with strange relics. Folded linens stained with brown blotches, mannequins wrapped in threadbare uniforms, dolls with button eyes stitched unevenly across their faces. In the center of the room stood a long wooden table. Upon it lay dozens of sewing tools, rusted needles, spools of thread so dark they looked wet scissors bent and warped into grotesque shapes. But what made Daniel's stomach clench was the figure seated at the head of the table. A mannequin or so, he thought at first. It was draped in a bellhop's uniform, its face stitched crudely with black thread into a permanent, crooked smile. One hand held a needle, suspended midair, and then it twitched. Daniel stumbled back. The mannequin's head tilted toward him, the seams around its mouth straining. The voice that spilled from it wasn't mechanical or hollow. It was the seamstress's smooth and sing-song. "You've wandered too far, Daniel." The mannequin's hand lifted thread, stretching taut between its fingers. The spools on the table began to unravel, black thread slithering across the wood, spilling to the floor, crawling toward him like serpents. Daniel's heart thrashed. He backed against the wall, kicking at the thread as it wound around his ankles. It clung stubbornly, tightening, burning his skin. From the cabinets, the relics stirred. The dolls' button eyes snapped open, glinting in the candlelight. Their stitched mouths quivered, tearing open, to emit a chorus of faint, childlike laughter. The mannequins rattled inside their cases, glass cracking as they leaned forward. The entire room was alive, animated by the seamstress's will. Daniel gritted his teeth, tearing at the thread around his legs, but it only dug deeper, drawing thin lines of blood. He reached for the nearest cabinet, smashing it open with his elbow, and yanked free a jagged shard of glass. He slashed wildly at the thread, the shard slicing through just enough for him to stumble forward. The mannequin's arms shot out wooden fingers, clawing at him as he rushed for the far side of the room. Their hollow faces turned in unison, mouths breaking open into black gaps that leaked the seamstress's laughter. He shoved past them, lungs burning. Another door appeared at the back, smaller, barely noticeable beneath the layers of hanging fabric. He grabbed at it desperately, throwing his weight against it. The hinges screeched, but it gave way, and Daniel tumbled into a narrow passage. The moment he crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind him. Darkness swallowed him whole. He froze, pressing his back against the wood, the shard of glass still trembling in his grip. His ears strained. No laughter, no thread, no creaking mannequins. Only silence, and then a sound. Not the seamstress, not her hum. This was different. A low rhythmic thump, like footsteps, slow, measured, deliberate. Daniel turned, forcing his eyes to adjust to the darkness. The passage stretched on stone, replacing plaster, the walls damp and glistening. The air was colder here, so cold it made his teeth ache. The footsteps continued echoing faintly ahead. He couldn't see who made them, but he felt their weight in his bones. He followed, though every step felt like surrender. The floor sloped downward deeper into the hotel's bowels, and then he saw it, faint light spilling from the end of the corridor. A room waited. When he stepped through the archway, Daniel froze. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow. Torches burned in sconces along the walls, their flames pale and sickly. In the center stood an altar carved of black stone. Upon it, dozens of spools of thread were piled high, some unraveling, spilling downward like streams of ink. But it was what stood behind the altar that rooted him in place. Not a mannequin, not a ghost, a figure tall and skeletal, draped in a cloak of tattered fabric, stitched from countless scraps. Its face was hidden behind a mask sewn together from fragments of porcelain dolls, animal skulls, and scraps of leather. Needles bristled from its chest like ribs. It lifted its head as though sensing him, and when it spoke, the voice was not the seamstress's. It was deeper, older, threaded with something inhuman. "You've come to the loom." Daniel's knees threatened to buckle. "The hotel is not haunted." The voice continued, each word vibrating through the stone. "It is alive, and I am the hand that keeps it whole." Threads began to unspool from the altar, crawling toward Daniel, hungry and patient. The words lingered in the cold chamber, echoing until Daniel wasn't sure if the figure had spoken once or 100 times. His pulse thudded in his ears, a frantic drumbeat that clashed against the slow, deliberate cadence of the loom's voice. Alive, the hotel was alive. He wanted to deny it, to laugh bitterly at the absurdity. But the walls themselves seemed to breathe. The torches hissed and swayed as though exhaling. The floor beneath his shoes pulsed faintly like a heartbeat deep in the stone. The loom stepped closer. The stitched cloak whispered against the ground seams, shifting and flexing as though the garment itself strained to break apart and slither free. Daniel stumbled backward. His heel scraped against the uneven stone, sending a sharp echo down the hall behind him. The figure tilted its head. "Do you know why they built this place here?" Its voice wasn't loud, yet it filled every inch of the chamber, soft but inescapable like thread tightening around bone. Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. They thought it was for grandeur, for luxury, for whispers of a dream in the mountains. The loom raised a needle-thin finger pointing at the altar. The spools shivered, spilling black strands down like veins of ink. But they did not listen to what already dwelled beneath the soil. They fed it with their fears, their secrets, their blood. The torches flared. For a moment, Daniel saw things carved into the stone walls, scenes crudely etched by countless hands, shapes of figures bent in prayer, their mouths sewn shut. Guests in fine clothing bound by thread, their eyes wide and hollow. A bellhop hanging from the rafters, thread twisting around his neck like a noose. He tore his gaze away, bile rising in his throat. The loom's voice softened, almost gentle. "You have walked its corridors. You have seen my stitches. You know the truth now, Daniel. There is no leaving." The threads slithered faster, curling around his shoes, tugging gently, testing his resistance. He raised the shard of glass still clutched in his hand. It shook with his trembling, catching a shard of torchlight. The loom's mask tilted, and though Daniel could not see its face, he felt it smile. A shard, a splinter, a broken thing. You carry it because you are broken too. I can mend you. I can make you whole again." The words pressed against his mind, heavy and persuasive. Images flashed unbidden, his own hands sewn neat and strong, his scars sealed shut, his fear stitched away. The promise was intoxicating, almost soothing. He forced himself to step back, clutching the glass tighter. "I'm not yours," he rasped. His throat felt raw, his voice foreign. The loom moved faster now. Stepping closer, the needles across its chest glinting with wet light. The spools on the altar unspooled violently, threads whipping out like lashes, striking the floor, the walls, his arms. One grazed his skin. It burned cold like ice, searing flesh. Daniel screamed, slashing the shard through the air. It cut one of the threads cleanly, the severed piece writhing on the ground like a dying worm before dissolving into smoke. The loom paused. Its head tilted once more, this time sharper. "You resist it," whispered. "So many never do." Daniel took advantage of the hesitation. He lunged sideways, skirting the altar, and bolted toward the far side of the chamber. His footsteps echoed loud and frantic as the torches flickered wildly behind him. Threads cracked against the stone, chasing him like living whips. He saw another passage, narrow, jagged, leading deeper into the hotel's underbelly. He didn't think. He just ran. The passage closed around him like the throat of a beast. His breath came ragged, every inhale laced with dust and frost. The sound of pursuit echoed, threads scraping, dragging the loom's steps, impossibly slow, yet always near. He stumbled down uneven steps, nearly falling headfirst, before bursting into another chamber. This one was different, smaller, intimate. Candles burned in shallow alcoves, their wax dripping thick trails down to the floor. In the center stood an old wooden chair. Upon it sat a woman, her head bowed forward. Long black hair draped across her face. Her dress was torn, stitched clumsily back together in patches. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, bound by black thread. The seamstress. Not a specter this time, not a shadow. Flesh. Daniel's chest clenched. She lifted her head slowly, strands of hair parting. Her eyes were wide, glassy, and her mouth was sewn shut with a single crooked stitch. Yet when she spoke, the words spilled out clear, unbroken. "You shouldn't have come here." Her voice was not cruel this time, not taunting. It trembled with sorrow. Daniel's hand shook the shard of glass, slipping from his grip and clattering against the floor. Behind him, the loom's footsteps approached. The chamber seemed to shrink, shadows spilling inward like water rising in a drowning room. The seamstress raised her bound hands just enough for him to see. The thread tightened, cutting into her wrists, drawing beads of blood. Her lips strained against the stitch, and still her words reached him. "You must end the thread." The words clung to Daniel's ears like a whisper carried through a storm. Fragile, fleeting, but undeniable. "End the thread." He stared at the seamstress, bound and trembling, her glassy eyes shimmering in the candlelight. The black stitch across her lips quivered, straining as though it might snap under the weight of her desperate plea. "End the thread," she repeated, though her mouth never moved. Her voice was all around him, seeping from the walls, riding on the cold air. Behind him, the footsteps drew nearer. The loom did not hurry. It didn't need to. Every step was deliberate, assured, as though it knew Daniel had no path but the one leading straight into its grasp. Daniel's gaze darted around the chamber. The candles bled wax like fat tears pooling at the seams of the stone floor. The seamstress sat utterly still, her bound hands trembling only when she tried to lift them, showing him again the dark thread digging into her flesh. "Tell me," his voice cracked barely above a whisper. "What does it mean?" Her head tipped toward the shard of glass lying at his feet. The tiny blade flickered with candlelight, no more than a splinter, but it gleamed with intent. The thread. Cut the thread. Daniel's chest seized. The realization pressed against him with the weight of inevitability. To end the thread, he would have to free her. perhaps destroy her, tear away the stitch that bound her mouth shut, that anchored her to the loom's will. But what would that unleash? The footsteps entered the chamber. The loom filled the doorway like a shadow stitched from the dark itself. The cloak trailed across the floor needles, clinking faintly threads, writhing from its sleeves, as though eager to taste new flesh. Daniel crouched instinctively, snatching up the shard of glass. His palm stung where the thread had burned him earlier, but he held tight to the shard until it cut into his skin. The loom's mask tilted toward the seamstress. She whispers lies, it intoned. She always has. That is her purpose, to tempt the living with freedom, while she serves me faithfully in silence. The seamstress shook her head violently, her dark hair snapping around her face. The stitch pulled tighter, blood blooming across her lips like ink soaking through paper. "End the thread," she screamed, though her mouth remained sealed. The loom's head swiveled toward Daniel. Slowly, patiently. "Do you know what happens when a stitch is cut?" "Daniel, things unravel. They tear. They collapse into ruin. She will not save you. She will unmake you." The words pressed against his skull, thick as fog. For a moment, Daniel almost believed them, but then he saw the seamstress's eyes, terrified, pleading human, not hollow like the mannequins, not cold like the dolls. She felt. Daniel lunged. The loom's threads cracked through the air, wrapping around his torso and arms, pulling him back. He hit the ground hard, the shard slicing into his palm. Pain flared white-hot, but it anchored him, grounding him in the moment. He slashed with the shard, severing one thread then another, each one writhing and dissolving in smoke. But more came, whipping against his skin, burning cold welts along his arms. Futile, the loom hissed, the mask's stitched mouth stretching unnaturally wide. Daniel roared, forcing himself forward. He stumbled to his knees at the seamstress's side, the shard trembling in his grip. Her eyes met his wide and wet, brimming with something he hadn't seen in this place until now. Hope. The loom surged forward, threads erupting from its cloak like a storm. Daniel raised the shard. His heart thundered, and with one desperate motion he slashed through the stitch binding the seamstress's mouth. The thread snapped with a sound far louder than it should have, like a rope breaking under tension, like 1,000 seams tearing at once. The seamstress gasped air, flooding into her lungs as though she had been drowning for decades. Her scream followed shrill and piercing shaking, the candles rattling the stone. The loom staggered. The threads recoiled violently, whipping against the walls, flailing like severed limbs. Its cloak convulsed seams, splitting the needles across its chest, rattling loose. The seamstress's mouth, free at last, opened wide. Her scream transformed into a low, resonant hum, the same tune Daniel had heard in the corridors, but now it was no longer mocking. It was a weapon, sharp and commanding. The chamber quaked. The candles guttered their flames, bending toward her voice. Threads snapped mid-air, unraveling into smoke. The loom reeled its mask, cracking down the center. No. It growled deeper than before the sound, a thunderous quake. You cannot unmake the loom. The seamstress clutched Daniel's arm, her nails digging deep. Her voice dropped to a whisper only he could hear. You must finish it. You must tear the heart from its stitch. Daniel's breath hitched. His bloodied hand tightened on the shard. The loom straightened, splitting mask glowing with pale fire threads, twisting into 1,000 tendrils ready to strike. And Daniel knew whatever came next would decide not just his fate, but the fate of the hotel itself. The chamber shook as though the mountain itself had been struck. Dust rained from the ceiling, sifting into Daniel's hair and stinging his eyes. The candles guttered wildly, their light bending in unnatural directions, as if the air itself wanted to recoil from what stood before him. The loom straightened its cracked mask, splitting wider, faint white light spilling from the fracture like fire bleeding from stone. The cloak writhed the threads extending from it, not like fabric, but like veins, endless wriggling tendrils that sought the seams of the world. The seamstress's grip on Daniel's arm tightened until her nails pierced his skin. Blood mingled with the black thread still coiled around her wrists. "Tear the heart from its stitch," she rasped, her freed lips trembling with every word. Daniel's throat closed, his lungs dragging for breath in the heavy air. Where is it?" The seamstress's gaze flicked toward the loom's chest. Beneath the needles and unraveling cloak, something pulsed faintly, an orb of knotted thread glowing with a sickly pale fire. Its heart. The loom seemed to hear the thought as clearly as Daniel did. The threads around its chest tightened, forming a ribcage of living string binding the orb deep within. "You would unmake me," it growled, voice low rolling. "Do you know what unmaking brings chaos? A tear without repair, a world without form." Its threads lashed outward, striking the floor where Daniel had stood a second earlier. He rolled hard to the side shards of stone cutting into his shoulder. He scrambled to his feet, his chest burning with every breath. The seamstress stood now trembling but alive, her bonds snapping one by one with each hum that left her throat. Her voice cut through the air, weaving sharp vibrations that severed the loom's grasping threads. The sound was strange, part song, part scream, a jagged hymn meant for breaking rather than soothing. Daniel used the moment. He charged. The loom roared its threads, writhing into a storm. They lashed Daniel's arms, legs, chest, pulling him back, suspending him midair like a puppet. He screamed, thrashing the shard of glass slipping from his hand and spinning across the stone floor. The shard landed just short of the seamstress's feet. Her voice faltered. Her eyes met Daniel's, then darted to the shard. Daniel understood. He twisted, pain tearing through his limbs as the threads pulled tighter, biting into his flesh. His muscles screamed. The loom's mask loomed closer, its cracked mouth dripping pale fire. "You will be mine," it hissed. "I will stitch you clean piece by piece." Daniel roared, wrenching one arm free with a surge of raw, will-tearing skin in the process. His hand shot downward, fingers brushing the cold shard. The loom's threads struck like snakes wrapping around his wrist. The shard nearly slipped free again until the seamstress sang louder, her voice shattering stone from the walls, disrupting the threads just enough for Daniel to close his grip. He didn't hesitate. He plunged the shard into the loom's chest, aiming for the glowing heart. The shard struck. For an instant, nothing happened. Then the world tore. The threads around Daniel snapped violently, flinging him backward. He hit the ground, the impact cracking through his spine. His vision blurred with spots of red and white. The loom staggered its mask, fracturing further, its cloak unraveling in furious, writhing waves. The glow in its chest pulsed brighter, spilling out from beneath the stitches, searing through the ribcage of thread like molten light. The scream that followed was not human. It was the tearing of fabric, the shatter of glass, the howl of wind through endless hollow corridors. It was every sound of breaking, every sound of unmaking. The seamstress fell to her knees, clutching her ears, her voice drowned by the cacophony. Daniel forced himself upright, his eyes fixed on the loom's chest. The shard was still embedded there, glowing hot in his hand, as though it had become part of the burning heart itself. The loom clawed at its threads, tightening, trying to stitch the wound closed. But the shard cut relentlessly, unraveling the bindings faster than they could reform. And then Daniel saw it clearly. The heart of the loom. An endless knot of threads, tangled and writhing, glowing with the suffering of every soul it had ever bound. Faces appeared in the strands, guests of the hotel staff, wanderers, lost in time, each trapped in the weave, screaming silently as they were pulled tighter into its core. Daniel's breath caught. He could see himself there too, his reflection twisted into the threads already half bound. The loom staggered toward him, the ground shaking under its steps. "You tear at your own ruin!" It thundered, voice splintering into many. If I unravel, so do you. Daniel's grip tightened on the charred blood boiling against the searing glow. His body screamed for release, for surrender. But the seamstress's voice rose again, weak but steady, cutting through the loom's roar. Finish it. Tear the heart free. Daniel surged forward, driving the shard deeper into the glowing knot. His vision whitened heat swallowing him whole. The loom convulsed its mask, splitting apart completely, revealing only endless thread inside, writhing in desperation. The heart cracked threads, snapping loose in violent arcs, striking walls and ceiling, shattering stone. Daniel screamed as he pulled. The shard dragged strands with it, unraveling the knot inch by inch. Faces screamed, threads whipped, the chamber itself split open. And then something snapped. Not a single thread, not a seam, but all of it. The loom collapsed inward, threads, retracting violently, ripping themselves apart in a cyclone of light and shadow. The scream stopped abruptly. Silence crashed down, absolute and suffocating. Daniel fell to his knees. The shard burned black in his hand, the glow gone. The seamstress crawled forward, blood at her lips, her voice a trembling whisper. It is undone. But the silence that followed was not peace. It was waiting. For the first time since entering the chamber, Daniel could hear his own breath. It came ragged, hollow, each inhale, slicing his throat like he had swallowed glass. The blackened shard slipped from his trembling hand, clattering across the floor, its sound sharp and final. The chamber no longer hummed. The oppressive thrum that had rattled the walls and bones alike was gone. No threads writhed in the corners, no pale light seeped through the cracks. The air lay heavy, stagnant, like a house abandoned mid-construction. Daniel's vision swam, but he forced his eyes to focus. The loom's remains, if they could be called that, were scattered like torn cloth across the stone floor. Bits of black thread curled and twitched before crumbling to dust, leaving nothing but ash. The mask had dissolved completely, leaving no trace of the fractured visage that had once gazed at him with stitched eyes. It was over, or so he thought. The seamstress crawled toward him, her body gaunt and broken, yet her gaze burned with clarity. "You tore the knot," she whispered, voice thin as the last flicker of a candle. "But tearing is not mending. You've undone the stitch, Daniel. Do you understand?" He shook his head, numb, refusing to let her words land. "It's gone. The loom's gone." Her lips curled into something that was neither smile nor frown. "Gone." She coughed, black flecks spattering the stone. "No, it is free." The silence deepened. Then Daniel noticed it. The air wasn't still after all. It moved subtly, a draft without source, slipping past his skin like fingers brushing fabric. The stone beneath him quivered softly, as though something beneath was shifting. He pushed himself upright, legs unsteady. The chamber no longer felt like a chamber. The walls flickered, their stone outlines bending like warped canvas. The seams of the room corners' archways, ceiling edges wavered like stitched cloth, being unpicked, thread by thread. "No," Daniel whispered, his voice cracked. The seamstress closed her eyes, a single tear cutting a clean line down the ash clinging to her cheek. The loom was never contained by this room alone. The threads stretched into every wall, every floor, every guest that ever lingered above. What you tore was not its prison. It was its tether. Daniel's heart plunged into his gut. Above them, faint but growing, came the groan of timber. The ceiling moaned like an old ship's hull in storm seas. Dust rained down. The hotel was unraveling. Daniel staggered toward the archway that led back to the stairs, his pulse beating so hard it blurred his vision. He turned back once, hesitating. The seamstress had slumped against the wall, her breathing shallow. "Go," she whispered, her voice almost tender. Your stitch is not yet written. The floor lurched violently. Stone split down the middle like torn fabric, jagged cracks spreading out like veins. Threads, faint and silvery, hissed up from the gaps, stretching into the air before dissipating like smoke. Daniel ran. The stairwell twisted around him, banisters bending as if pulled by unseen hands. The wallpaper writhed patterns shifting like living embroidery, unraveling in real time. His feet pounded against the steps, each one quaking beneath his weight. On the floors above, screams began. Not just one, not two, dozens. A chorus of voices, guests, staff souls that should not even be there, all shrieking as the seams of their world split open. He burst into the hallway he had first entered, only to stop dead in his tracks. The corridor was wrong. It stretched far too long, its length pulling and warping before his eyes. The doors leaned sideways, half falling, their brass numbers sliding down like melted wax. A carpet of red unraveled beneath his boots, threads whipping loose and tangling around his ankles, as if desperate to hold him still. At the far end of the hall, something moved. A figure stepped into view, its form indistinct, as though seen through torn fabric. It was neither the loom nor entirely human. A shadow stitched together from scraps, its outline wavering, pieces of different figures overlapping, a man, a woman, a child, all woven into one walking seam. And then another figure joined it. And another, the hallway filled with them. Thread-borne silhouettes, all staring, all silent. Each carried fragments of the loom's essence, its voice stitched into their hollow bodies. "You unmade the heart," they whispered together, a sound like wind rattling curtains. "Now everything unravels with us." Daniel stumbled back, throat tight, as the walls groaned louder, threads of reality peeling away like wallpaper in fire. There was no longer a question of whether the hotel was collapsing. The question was whether he could escape before the last stitch gave way. Daniel's lungs burned as he forced himself down the impossible hallway. Every step he took stretched the floor further, as though he were running across a rug being pulled endlessly out from under him. The stitched figures lining the corridor never advanced, never chased. They simply watched, their hollow eyes glinting faintly, their whisper traveling along the walls like a ripple in cloth. Unravel, unravel. His boot caught in a tangle of loose threads. He nearly fell, yanking his foot free, the fibers clinging like wet seaweed. A brass number plate slid off a door beside him and clinked on the warped floor, the sound sharp in the oppressive silence. The corridor breathed, he could hear it, the walls inhaling the floorboards, sighing as though the entire building had become one great lung. Finally, the hall bent sharply and ended at a stairwell. Daniel didn't question the sudden shift. He simply hurled himself through the door and gripped the banister, racing downward. But the stairs were no longer wood and carpet. They had become rope ladders, woven of fibers, red, black, and ivory white, dangling down into a pit where the hotel should have been. With each step, he took the threads, frayed his weight, loosening them. He clung to the rope, breath-sharp eyes wide. The walls around the stairwell wavered, torn like fabric curtains in a storm. Through the tears, Daniel glimpsed fragments of rooms, not his own. A dining hall filled with frozen guests staring at plates of rotted food. A ballroom with chandeliers swaying above a floor of broken glass. A nursery where toys bled, stuffing their button eyes, dangling by threads. Each scene flickered, appearing for only a heartbeat before dissolving into raw darkness. The hotel wasn't just falling apart. It was unraveling into all the lives and deaths stitched inside it. Daniel descended, hands burning against the ropes, until at last he dropped onto a landing that should have belonged to the lobby. The grand entrance hall stretched before him, its once proud columns bowing like old knees. Chandeliers swayed violently, their light bulbs bursting one by one, raining shards of glass like hail. The great front doors stood visible, impossibly far distorted by the shifting space, but he could see night beyond them, open sky salvation. He bolted. The air thickened as he ran, every step like forcing his way through wet fabric. His arms dragged heavy as though caught in invisible threads. A shadow darted across the far wall. A tall figure bent back its arms, unnaturally long, its head twitching like it was stitched too loosely. Daniel pushed harder. His body felt split in two, half in this world, half in another. His hand stretched toward the brass handles of the door. He could almost touch them when something coiled around his ankle. He looked down. Threads black and glistening were winding up his leg, pulling him back toward the gaping lobby. The stitched phantoms were no longer still. They moved, dozens of them, drifting silently closer, their bodies bending at impossible angles as though their seams were coming undone. No! Daniel gasped, clawing at the brass handles, his nails scraping against the metal. Not here, not now. The doors groaned. They weren't opening. The wood warped beneath his grip, softening, becoming fabric in his hands. The handles unraveled into threads that slipped through his fingers like water. Behind him, the phantoms whispered as one. "You are part of the stitch. You cannot leave." Daniel screamed, pulling, kicking against the threads, coiling up his body, wrapping his torso, binding his wrists. His strength faltered. His vision tunneled. Then through the chaos he saw it. A faint sliver of moonlight broke through the warped seams of the doorway. A tear in the fabric of the door, just wide enough. Without thinking, Daniel thrust his hand through. Cold night air touched his skin. Real. Alive. The phantoms shrieked, the sound piercing like glass shards in his ears. The entire hotel convulsed around him, beams cracking walls, ripping. Daniel pushed harder, forcing his shoulder, his chest, until he tore through the seam like ripping old cloth. And then he fell, not onto the gravel drive outside the Stanley, not onto the safety of earth and pine air. He landed on carpet. Daniel blinked, dazed, pushing himself upright. He was standing in a hallway. A long hallway. Patterned carpet beneath his hands. Doors lining both sides, their brass numbers gleaming faintly in dim light. It was the same corridor, the same stretch he had just run. Only this time it was perfectly still. No warping, no unraveling. Just silence. His pulse thundered in his ears. His throat went dry. He was back inside. And somewhere from behind one of the closed doors came the slow, deliberate sound of scissors opening and closing. Daniel froze where he stood, every nerve in his body strung tight as the metallic snip, snip, snip echoed down the silent corridor. The sound was deliberate, measured like a tailor cutting fabric. It didn't belong here, not in the hollow stillness of this hallway that had already betrayed him. His throat tightened. He forced himself to breathe through his nose, slow, controlled, though his pulse betrayed the effort, hammering so hard it shook his vision. He glanced down the hallway. Nothing moved. Every door was shut, brass numbers gleaming faintly under the dim sconces. It looked like a normal hotel floor, eerily clean, untouched by the chaos he had just endured. But the sound persisted. Snip, snip. It seemed to move, gliding along the doors, never fixed in one place, as though whatever held the scissors was walking slowly from room to room, trimming invisible threads that only it could see. Daniel's legs threatened to buckle. He turned and pressed his palm against the nearest door handle, praying it would turn. It did. The door swung open on silent hinges. Inside was a guest room, immaculate, ordinary. White sheets folded tightly, an untouched desk lamp, curtains drawn. Not a speck of dust. Daniel stepped in, shut the door quietly, and leaned against it. His chest heaved as he tried to steady himself, ears straining for the sound of the scissors. The silence pressed in. The room was too still. He took a cautious step forward, eyes darting. The lamp clicked on when he turned the switch, bathing the space in warm yellow. For a fleeting moment, relief washed through him. Maybe, just maybe, he had broken the loop. Then he noticed the mirror. It was fixed above the desk oval and old framed in tarnished silver. He hadn't seen it when he entered. Now it caught the lamplight and reflected him back, hollow-eyed, ash-streaked, trembling. But something was wrong. His reflection was delayed. When he tilted his head, the mirrored Daniel lagged just slightly before mimicking the movement. When he raised his hand, the reflection twitched and jerked before following. Daniel's breath hitched. He took a step back. The reflection didn't. It stayed where it was, hand still raised, head tilted at an odd angle. The glass shimmered faintly like rippling water. Then, with an almost imperceptible motion, the mirrored Daniel lowered his hand slowly, deliberately, until it reached under the desk and lifted something into view. Scissors. Long silver old-fashioned sewing scissors. The snip that followed didn't come from the hallway. It came from inside the glass. Daniel stumbled back, crashing into the bed frame. His reflection didn't mimic him now. It stared, unblinking its lips, twitching into a smile that wasn't his. Then the mirror bulged outward. The surface rippled like fabric stretched too thin, and a pale hand pressed against the glass from the other side, followed by the glint of steel. The scissors opened and closed slowly, the sound sharper than ever. Daniel lunged for the door. His hand wrapped the handle, twisting hard-locked. He yanked, slammed his shoulder against it, but it refused to move. Behind him, the mirror strained further outward. Threads of silver light stretched across its surface, weaving and snapping. The reflection stepped closer, its body pressing forward as though the glass were nothing more than a veil of cloth. "Unravel it," whispered. Its voice was his, but not. Layered, hollow, stitched with tomes that didn't belong. Daniel screamed, throwing the lamp across the room. It smashed against the mirror in a burst of glass and sparks. For a heartbeat, silence fell. The mirror flickered, and then it split. The surface tore open from top to bottom, spilling light into the room, threads whipping out like lashes. Daniel was flung backward into the bed as the reflection stepped through. It wasn't him anymore. Not fully. It was taller, its limbs slightly too long, its joints bent at unnatural angles. Its face still wore his features, but stretched, distorted, stitched at the edges. In its hand gleamed the scissors, dripping black. It stepped toward him, each movement fluid, deliberate. "Your stitch has come loose," it murmured, "and I will cut it." The scissors opened wide. The stitched reflection advanced with a deliberate, calm scissors, gleaming as the blades opened and shut with a metallic click that cut straight into Daniel's nerves. He pushed himself back against the headboard of the bed, heart hammering so loudly it filled his ears. The thing had his face, his eyes, but wrong, stitched at the edges, lips pulled too wide, pupils too dark. It tilted its head in an almost curious way, like a tailor admiring fabric before cutting. Daniel's voice cracked. "Stay back." The words carried no weight. The reflection smiled that impossible stretch across its cheeks, pulling the seams taut, and with a slow precision, it dragged the tip of the scissors along the wall. Threads appeared where the blades passed, unraveling from the plaster, as if the room itself were made of cloth. The sound was unbearable, a steady rip like linen tearing under a knife. "No." Daniel whispered, his chest tight. He grabbed the nearest thing within reach, a heavy Gideon Bible from the nightstand, and hurled it. The book struck the figure square in the chest. For a split second, the body jolted fabric, fluttering where flesh should be. Loose threads spilled out of its form before drawing back and sewing itself whole again. The reflection looked down at the book on the floor, then back at him. And it laughed. It was his laugh, only hollow stitched with other voices. Daniel lunged off the bed, aiming for the door. His shoulder rammed into it again, but instead of wood, it rippled like cloth beneath his weight, his body half sinking into the door frame before it snapped him back violently. He fell to the carpet, gasping. and the scissors came down, blades snapping shut inches from his face. He rolled instinctively, the sharp edge grazing his cheek, drawing a thin line of blood. The reflection moved fluidly too quickly, looming above him, arms stretching unnaturally as it thrust the scissors again. Daniel scrambled under the bed, heart slamming against his ribs. Dust and stray threads clung to his face as he crawled deeper into the shadows. From above, the reflection bent low, peering beneath with eyes that glowed faintly. Its smile widened impossibly wide now until it split the skin at its cheeks. The scissors reached under, clacking open and shut blindly, each snap cutting through the air just shy of his limbs. Daniel grabbed the bed frame and kicked hard, sending the entire structure crashing sideways. The mirror creature stumbled, giving him a chance. He bolted not for the door, but for the curtains. He yanked them aside. Behind the glass was not the night sky, not the pine forest beyond the Stanley. It was fabric, thick black cloth stitched tightly across the window. The scissors ripped through it from behind. A neat slit split the fabric, moonlight bleeding through. Daniel's breath caught as he pushed his hand against the tier. Cold air. Outside. He shoved his shoulder through, tearing it wider, and threw himself into the night. He landed hard on gravel, rolling until his arms scraped against stone. He blinked up at the sky, real sky, pale moon, hanging above the silhouette of the Rockies. For the first time in hours or days, he didn't know he felt the bite of true night air on his skin. Behind him, the hotel loomed. Its windows flickered with strange light, each one glowing faintly like seams pulsing beneath the skin of some giant creature. The torn fabric at the window above still fluttered, swaying in a wind that shouldn't exist, and from that rip Daniel saw it, the reflection, still smiling, still holding the scissors, watching, but it didn't leap through. Not yet. It simply pressed one pale hand against the window's torn edge and whispered something he almost didn't hear. Threads always pull you back. The curtains closed. The glow of the window faded. The night went silent. Daniel staggered to his feet, body trembling, blood drying on his cheek. His instincts screamed at him to run into the woods down the road, anywhere away from this cursed place. But his legs wouldn't move. His gaze stayed fixed on the towering bulk of the Stanley, because deep down a new terror unfurled. He wasn't sure if he had escaped at all. Daniel stood in the gravel chest, heaving the cold air, biting his lungs. He pressed his palms against the stones, as though needing proof that they were real. They scraped his skin sharp and jagged, leaving faint cuts that stung in the night air. This is real, he told himself. I'm outside. I'm free. But the silence was wrong. The forest stretched before him, tall pines swaying gently in the moonlight. Beyond them, the jagged outline of the Rockies carved into the sky. It was beautiful, still almost serene. Too serene. He turned slowly in a circle. No sound of crickets, no distant calls of owls. Not even the whisper of wind through the branches. Just silence deep and pressing, like being sealed inside a jar. The gravel beneath him shifted strangely as he stood. His boots crunched, but the sound seemed dampened, absorbed. He bent down, picked up a stone, and rolled it between his fingers. It wasn't stone. It was cloth. The rock crumpled in his grip, revealing threads stitched tightly in the shape of stone, each strand dark as ink. He dropped it quickly, his stomach lurching, and when it hit the ground, it didn't clatter. It simply landed with a muffled thud. No, Daniel whispered. His throat tightened. He turned toward the forest, toward salvation. He stumbled forward, feet crunching on the unreal gravel until he reached the edge of the trees. He pressed a hand against the bark of a pine. At first it felt solid rough under his fingertips. Then he noticed the seam, an almost invisible line running down the trunk. He pressed harder, and the bark gave way with a soft, tearing sound. His hand sank in. Threads pulled loose, curling around his wrist like cobwebs. He yanked back violently. The forest swayed again, but not from wind. From movement. Every tree leaned subtly toward him. The branches curved unnaturally like puppet arms drawn by hidden strings. The silence deepened until it rang in his ears. A voice came through it, soft layered, stitched with his own tones. "You never left." Daniel spun. The hotel still loomed behind him. Taller now, wider. Its windows no longer rectangular but warped, bending into shapes like eyes stitched into fabric. Curtains billowed through no wind stirred. The tear in the window above the one he'd crawled through still fluttered faintly. And within it, the reflection's pale face lingered half-hidden in shadow. It grinned scissors, glinting, and leaned forward. Snip. The sound echoed across the false landscape. Daniel turned and ran into the wood's branches, clawing at him, the false gravel giving way beneath his boots, as if the ground itself wanted to trip him. He ran blind, driven only by the need to escape. But no matter how far he pushed himself, the forest didn't change. The same trees bent toward him, the same stitched seams appeared in the trunks, the same pale moon hung overhead, stitched neatly in the black sky. It wasn't real. None of it. The sound of the scissors grew closer. Snip, snip, snip. It came from everywhere now, circling him above, below, inside the trees. The forest rippled threads, pulling tight, then slack, as though the whole world was a sheet of cloth being adjusted by invisible hands. Daniel fell to his knees, chest-heaving, vision blurring with terror. His hands clawed at the dirt, but even that unraveled beneath his fingers, turning into long black threads that coiled around his wrists. He tried to scream, but the sound was muffled, swallowed, and then he saw it, the Stanley itself rising between the trees where it shouldn't be. Its roof line stretched impossibly high windows like endless black eyes. The whole building shimmered with threads glowing faintly, as though it had been sewn into the landscape, stitched layer upon layer upon layer. The voice came again everywhere at once. "You were already inside. You were always inside." Daniel's vision tilted. He staggered forward, and as he did, the forest peeled away like fabric torn from a frame. The sky collapsed inward, stars falling like threads cut loose. The ground buckled, and when it all fell away, he was standing once more in the hotel corridor. Same faded wallpaper, same brass sconces flickering weakly. Behind him the scissors clicked shut. The corridor stretched endlessly in both directions, its faded wallpaper curling like old fabric left too long in damp air. Daniel froze, every nerve in his body vibrating with the awareness that he hadn't escaped anything. He was still in the Stanley, or rather in something wearing the Stanley's skin. The scissors clicked behind him. He turned slowly, stomach knotting. The reflection stood at the end of the hallway. Its head tilted, just so lips stitched back into that too-wide grin. The blades glimmered in its hand as it advanced, each step measured unhurried. Daniel backed away. His boots sank faintly into the carpet, the threads stretching under his weight before knitting themselves back into place. He swallowed hard, realizing with icy certainty that the very walls around him were alive. "No more," he muttered to himself. His voice was low, desperate, half a plea. No more games. The reflection raised a hand, not to strike, not to cut, but to gesture. A single finger pressed against its stitched lips. A hush. Then it extended the scissors and snipped the air in front of it. The hallway shifted instantly. The sconces flickered and went out one by one, swallowing the corridor in near blackness. Only the faint silver gleam of the blades remained bobbing closer. But the silence was worse than the dark. It pressed against Daniel's ears until he thought they would burst. Then came the voices, not loud, not shrieking. soft, almost soothing, like a lullaby sung from every closed door in the hall. Words he couldn't understand, stitched together in tones that wove over and under one another, forming a melody that set his teeth on edge. The air thickened warm and suffocating, smelling faintly of mothballs and dust. Daniel stumbled forward, desperate to escape the oppressive whispers. He grabbed one of the doorknobs at random and yanked. It opened. Inside the room was bathed in dim golden light. A bed sat neatly made of vanity mirror, reflecting faint shadows. At first, it looked almost normal, and he staggered in with relief. Then he saw the bedspread, every square of fabric stitched with faces. Dozens of them pressed into the quilt, their eyes closed, their expressions frozen in restless dreams. He staggered back, bile rising. The whispering rose louder, pressing against his skull. The faces stirred eyelids, fluttering lips, twitching as though trying to speak through sewn mouths. The reflection appeared in the vanity, not standing in the room but inside the mirror. Its hand pushed against the glass, stretching the surface like water. Daniel stumbled back against the wall. The quilted faces began to move more violently, writhing under the covers like trapped bodies. No, he screamed, his throat raw. He bolted back into the hall. The corridor had changed again. Now the wallpaper had peeled away entirely, revealing not plaster, but bolts of cloth rolls of fabric, stacked high like walls in a tailor's workshop. The air was heavy with the smell of dust dye and old thread, and there it was, the reflection. But it wasn't walking this time. It floated slightly above the ground, its form unraveling and restitching itself with every step. One moment whole, the next, a flutter of threads, then whole again. The scissors opened, then shut, each metallic snap sharp enough to cut through thought. Daniel pressed his back against the wall, feeling the rough texture of cloth beneath his palms. His breath came fast, ragged. He tried to steady himself. "Why me?" he whispered, though the words had no weight. "Why?" The reflection stopped. It raised its head slightly. When it spoke, it was his own voice, but fractured, layered, stitched with others. "Because you dream in thread." The words sliced through him as surely as the scissors could, and then the figure lunged. Daniel ducked instinct, carrying him forward. The scissors bit into the wall above his head, tearing a clean slit through the fabric that oozed black light. He hit the floor, rolled, and scrambled toward the nearest corner, his breath hot and ragged in his chest. The lullaby voices swelled again, louder, coaxing, almost kind. He forced himself not to listen, not to sink into their rhythm. He pushed through another door. This room was worse. The floor was a loom. Giant spools of thread spinning endlessly, weaving together strips of fabric that stretched into the walls and ceiling. And hanging above the loom, tangled in its threads, were people, their limbs twitching faintly, their faces hidden by masks sewn from linen. One of them turned toward him. Beneath the mask, he heard a muffled sob. "Help!" The scissors struck the doorway behind him. Daniel screamed and stumbled into the loom room threads, catching his clothes wrapping around his arms. He clawed at them desperately, but the more he struggled, the tighter they bound him. The reflection stepped through the doorway, smile widening, scissors raised. And Daniel realized this wasn't a hotel at all. It was a trap. A place sewn together, fed by every soul who ever walked its halls. And now the loom was weaving him. The threads tightened with every frantic movement. Daniel thrashed his wrists, pulling against the cords that snaked around him, each strand cutting shallow grooves into his skin. The more he fought, the deeper they dug, as though the loom itself recognized his resistance and sought to punish it. The room hummed with the slow, steady rhythm of weaving. The spools spun on their axes, pulling threads across the floor, into the walls, back into themselves again. It was endless, circular, a cycle that promised no escape. Above him, the figures swayed in their bindings. Their masked faces tilted slightly, all in unison like marionettes bound to the same invisible hand. The sound of sobbing came again, muffled, but insistent, vibrating through the fabric itself. Daniel twisted his head toward them, desperate. "I'll help." He gasped, words catching in his throat. But the loom answered first. The thread surged, pulling him off the ground, lifting him into the air. His legs kicked boots, scraping against the spinning frame. He dangled for a moment, caught between the crisscross of fibers, his chest squeezed so tight he could barely draw breath. The reflection stepped into the room. The scissors glinted opening with a deliberate slowness, closing with a snap that echoed over the hum of the loom. Its smile never faltered as it raised the blades to the air, pointing them directly at him. "You were always meant to be part of the pattern," it whispered in his voice. The words struck deeper than the bindings. Daniel shook his head violently. "No, I'm not. I won't." The loom shifted beneath him. The figures overhead shuddered as though in response, their limbs twitching in a rhythm that matched the spinning spools. The sound of their muffled cries grew louder, joining the low hum until it became a terrible harmony, a chorus of trapped voices weaving themselves into the fabric of the room. Daniel closed his eyes, trying to block out the sound. He focused on the pressure around his wrists, the give of the threads when he twisted just right. They weren't rope. They weren't steel. They were fabric. And fabric could be torn. He twisted violently, yanking his arm toward the sharp edge of the loom. The thread stretched, cut into his skin, then finally snapped. The pain was sharp-hot, but freedom coursed through him. He wrenched his other arm against the machinery threads, biting, snapping, falling away. The loom screamed. The hum changed pitch, rising into a shrill wail, like the shriek of wood, splintering and metal grinding. The figures overhead convulsed in their bindings, their muffled cries tearing free voices, raw and terrible. The reflection's grin faltered. Just for a second, Daniel dropped to the ground, hitting the loom's frame hard enough to knock the air from his lungs. He scrambled to his feet, blood dripping from his wrists. He grabbed a loose spool from the floor, heavy wooden rough, and hurled it at the reflection. It passed through the figure. The reflection unraveled into threads, then restitched itself whole again, smile wider than ever. But Daniel didn't wait to watch. He bolted toward the far wall, shoving through layers of cloth that hung like curtains. Threads tore against his shoulders, clung to his face, pulled at his boots. He ripped them away, one after another, until he stumbled through into another corridor. This one was wrong. The floor beneath him was not carpet, but raw fabric stretched, taut, sagging faintly beneath his weight. The walls bowed inward, stitched seams visible along their edges. The air was close, hot, reeking of dye and something coppery, something like blood. The hum of the loom followed him, quieter now, but steady. Always steady. Daniel leaned against the wall, his chest heaving, his wrists burning. For a moment, he let himself believe he had bought time. A breath, a heartbeat, then the wall pulsed. Threads writhed beneath the surface, tightening and loosening in waves, as if the entire corridor was breathing with him. And from deep within the fabric, a whisper crawled into his ears, into his bones. "You're unraveling already." Daniel staggered forward, panic mounting. He glanced at his hands, at the cuts across his wrists. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw threads where veins should be dark and taut beneath his skin. He shook his head violently, pressing his palms against his eyes. No, it's not real. Not real. The scissors clicked again, distant echoing. He raised his head, trembling. The corridor stretched endlessly, doors on either side. Every knob gleamed faintly, as though daring him to open them. The fabric beneath his boots shifted, threads tightening with every step, guiding him forward, whether he wanted to go or not. And at the far end of the corridor, the reflection waited. Its smile glowed faintly in the dark eyes, glimmering like black beads sewn into cloth. It raised the scissors once more, snapping them shut with a sound that echoed like the final cut. The corridor pulsed beneath Daniel's boots, like the belly of some great beast. Each step sank into fabric that stretched and quivered, threatening to tear, only to knit itself together again. His breath came sharp, ragged, each inhale carrying the stale scent of dust and something darker, something like dried blood clinging to cloth. At the far end, the reflection stood as if waiting for him, the scissors glinting faintly. No movement, no rush, just the endless patience of something that knew he could never escape. Daniel pressed a hand against his chest. His heart hammered, but beneath the frantic rhythm he felt something else, something wrong. He looked down at his arm, at the cuts that laced his wrist. Threads writhed faintly from the wound's dark fibers pushing through the skin as though stitching themselves into place. He stumbled back, eyes wide. No. No, no, no. His voice cracked, desperate, but the words fell flat in the suffocating silence. The walls leaned inward. Their seams bulged, stretched, and from those bulging seams came whispers. Not screams this time, but murmurs. Fragments of conversations fractured and overlapping. Words like "stay forever" thread blending into one another, indistinct but insistent. Daniel clawed at his wrist, trying to tear the threads free. They resisted. The more he pulled, the deeper they sank, sliding under his skin like worms burrowing into flesh. His stomach lurched. He gagged, bile rising. The reflection began to walk. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Each step clicked with the metallic snap of scissors opening and closing. The whispers from the walls grew louder. The seams split and hands pressed outward. Hands stitched from fabric fingers, long and ragged palms, flat against the thin layer that separated them from the corridor. Dozens of them reaching, pushing, straining, as if trying to break through. Daniel forced himself forward. He couldn't stop. He couldn't let it catch him. His boots sank deeper into the floor threads clinging to the soles, trying to pull him down. He ripped one foot free, then the other, lungs burning. The reflection mirrored him exactly. When Daniel stumbled, it stumbled. When he gasped, it gasped. It was his face, his body, his shadow stitched in reverse, and with every step it grew clearer. Not just a copy, not just a reflection. It was him. Or the version of him that would remain once the hotel was finished weaving. Daniel's mind frayed. He could feel it, the edges of his thoughts unraveling like torn cloth. The memory of his name flickered faint and fragile. The memory of sunlight, of air that smelled of pine outside the hotel, of the life before all this gone, slipping through like loose stitches. No, he whispered. He pressed his forehead against the wall, the fabric warm against his skin. He closed his eyes and forced himself to remember anything. His father's laugh, the sound of rain on a roof, a face, a hand. He reached for them, desperate. But all that came back was thread, endless black thread. The corridor trembled. The hands from the walls pressed harder, ripping seams wide enough for faces to push through. Hollow, eyeless masks formed from cloth mouths sewn shut. Their muffled hums joined the chorus, a lullaby meant to smother thought. Daniel stumbled forward, closer to the reflection. He had no choice. The corridor was pulling him, weaving him along. The scissors snapped shut. The sound was final, absolute. The reflection raised its hand. And Daniel saw for the first time that the blades were not meant for him. They were meant for the thread already in him, the stitches crawling under his skin. The reflection tilted its head, smiling as if in offering. Daniel's body shook with a terrible realization the reflection wasn't chasing him. It was waiting for him to give in, and in his bones, he knew the truth. The Stanley didn't kill its guests, it kept them, sewn into walls, into carpets, into the whispering seams of every corridor. And he was already halfway woven. The scissors gleamed, inviting him closer. Daniel staggered toward the end of the corridor, each step slower, heavier. as though his own body was no longer entirely his. The threads that had burrowed into his wrists crept higher now, winding along veins, pulling at tendons like invisible marionette strings. Every muscle felt borrowed, every movement not fully his own. The reflection his double waited with a patience that chilled him more than any chase could. Its smile was quiet, unchanging, its dark eyes gleaming with a promise he couldn't bear to understand. The scissors hung open in its hand blades wide as though ready to cut him free, or cut him apart. The corridor itself seemed to bend toward that figure. The walls bowed inward fabric, straining seams, splitting wider. The stitched hands clawed through some, tearing themselves fully free their bodies, little more than silhouettes of thread. They reached for him, not to stop him, but to guide him forward, as though eager for him to join them. His chest ached with the weight of it. Not just fear, but a suffocating pressure, as if every beat of his heart was tightening the stitches that crawled beneath his skin. He looked down again. His arms were no longer arms. They were becoming cloth. The cuts had sealed themselves not with scabs, but with dark seams crisscrossing stitches that tugged whenever he tried to flex his fingers. He could hardly breathe. A scream pressed at the back of his throat, but refused to come. What good would sound do in a place made only of silence and hums? The reflection lifted the scissors higher. For the first time it spoke clearly, its voice steady, soft, and unmistakably his own. "You're tired, Daniel. It's easier if you stop fighting." The sound hollowed him. Hearing himself say those words he had sworn not to believe, drove him to his knees. The corridor pulsed, tightening around him, pressing him closer to the figure. "No," he rasped, shaking his head violently. His hair stuck to his sweat-damp forehead. "I'm not yours." The reflection tilted its head, a gesture almost tender. "You already are. Every thread in this place knows your name. You're woven into the story now." Daniel lurched forward onto his hands, the floor sinking beneath his palms like wet cloth. He tried to push himself up, but the fabric clung threads twining around his wrists, his ankles dragging him down. The stitched hands from the walls broke free fully, now crawling on spindly thread limbs, their eyeless masks turning toward him. They did not strike. They did not claw. They only reached palms out as though in welcome. A weight pressed against his shoulders. He looked up, and the reflection stood over him closer than it had ever been. Its face was his, but smoother, paler, as if stripped of every imperfection. Perfected. Finished. The scissors gleamed between them. Daniel's body shook with one final shiver of defiance. He thought of escape, of tearing the stitches free, of running into the dark no matter where it led. But the threads inside him tightened, tugging him still. The reflection lowered the scissors toward his chest, stopping just above his heart. The blades hovered open. Daniel felt the cold edge against his shirt through to his skin, and then with a softness more terrifying than violence, the reflection whispered, "Will you let me finish you?" The walls shuddered. The corridor shook. The hum of the unseen loom rose to a piercing crescendo. Every stitched figure, every masked face leaned closer, their muffled cries vibrating with anticipation. Daniel clenched his teeth, tears burning in his eyes. He had no more strength to run, no more air to scream. There was only the choice: surrender to the stitching and become one with the hotel, or take the scissors and fight what was already inside him. The reflection held out the blades. His hands, trembling, began to rise, and the hum fell silent. The silence after the hum was unbearable. It pressed into Daniel's ears like a weight, thick and suffocating, louder than any scream. His shaking hands hovered just below the gleaming blades, the scissors extended toward him by the reflection. Every stitched figure that had emerged from the walls froze in place, their eyeless masks turned expectantly, their hollow silence begging for the choice to be made. The fabric of the corridor rippled as though holding its breath. Daniel's heart hammered. Each beat felt weaker, thinner, as if the thread in his veins was taking over, replacing blood with dark fiber. His skin crawled with the pull of stitches weaving deeper beneath the surface. He could feel it. The hotel wanted him, needed him. The reflection smiled with quiet serenity. It was not menacing now. It was patient, loving, inevitable. Its time, it whispered in his voice, soft as a lullaby. Daniel's trembling fingers closed around the scissors. The cold metal bit into his skin, anchoring him in this single fragile moment. He lifted the blades. His reflection mirrored him perfectly. Two Daniels facing one another in a corridor stitched from nightmare. The stitched figures pressed closer, crowding the walls, their presence heavy, their anticipation almost physical. Daniel pressed the scissors to the seam in his wrist, where the thread pulsed faintly beneath his skin. His stomach churned bile thick in his throat. If he cut, would he free himself, or would he unravel entirely? His reflection leaned forward, voice gentle. You can't tear away what you already are. The corridor groaned, the fabric stretching outward like a lung ready to exhale. Daniel closed his eyes. For a moment, he imagined sunlight. He imagined pine air crisp and clean outside the hotel. He imagined being whole, and then he pushed. The scissors closed with a sharp final snap. For an instant, silence. The world seemed to pause, the figures holding still, the walls motionless. Then came the tearing. Threads whipped free from Daniel's skin, unraveling across his arms, his chest, his throat. He screamed, not from pain, but from the sheer force of it. His voice shredded into the same fabric that composed the walls. The stitched figures shrieked with muffled joy, their eyeless masks splitting wider as if grinning. The reflection leaned close, and as Daniel's vision began to fray, it whispered, "Now you're finished." The corridor collapsed inward, the walls folding the fabric, twisting. His body sank into the floor, the seams swallowing him, sewing him into the carpet. His scream became another muffled hum in the endless song of the hotel. And when the corridor smoothed itself out again, there was no Daniel. Only silence. Only thread. The Stanley had claimed another piece of itself. And now, as the echoes of the story settle, let your body sink into the calm of this moment. The tale of Daniel and the Stanley Hotel lingers like the fading notes of a forgotten song, a reminder that some places hold on to more than just memories. They hold on to people, weaving them into their fabric, making them part of something larger, stranger, and timeless. But you are safe here. Outside the walls of that imagined corridor, you are wrapped in the comfort of your own room, your own bed. The shadows here are familiar. The air is yours alone, and no hum or whisper will disturb your rest. Take a slow breath in, and then let it fall gently away. With each exhale, let go of the remnants of tension. Feel your arms and legs grow heavy, the kind of heaviness that carries you deeper into rest. The story has ended, its sharp edges softened, leaving only quiet behind. The threads that bound Daniel cannot touch you. They exist only in the dreamscape, fading with every blink that carries you closer to sleep. Allow yourself to drift. The world outside your thoughts is still waiting for you to surrender to it. In this safe, familiar place, you are whole. You are untouched. You are at peace. The Stanley remains only a story, a haunting for the imagination, while you drift further from its echoes. Let the final image fade, leaving nothing but soft darkness, the rhythm of your breath, and the comfort of knowing you are free. Sleep well now and dream gently.